The question begins not with the stars nor the horizon, but with the ground that bears our weight. Every day people walk, build, rest, and move across its surface, rarely pausing to imagine what lies beneath. Soil and stone are assumed as backdrop, inert foundation, dependable and mute. Yet, if one slows, if one lets curiosity linger, the thought emerges like a faint vibration. The earth is not only what we see above. It stretches downward in vastness far greater than the sky we admire. And within that hidden volume might the first true civilization have taken shape, not in the open air, but in the hush of underground chambers. To ask this is not to claim evidence, not yet. It is to open a door into possibility. The style of questioning is soft, almost dreamlike. What if, before villages and fields appeared under the sun, there was already a gathering of people who decided that the real security lay below? What if our first attempt at society, fragile and tentative, did not unfold on plains or riverbanks, but in the shadow of stone? The thought drifts like a torchlight down a tunnel. It does not shout. It only glows. A baseline fact steadies the imagination. The volume of earth beneath our feet is incomparably greater than the thin atmosphere above. Mountains rise kilometers, but crust descends tens of kilometers before reaching the mantle. In that thickness are voids, caves, lava tubes, aquifers, labyrinths etched by water over millions of years. To dismiss them as empty is to overlook one of the planet's largest unexplored habitats. Humanity, still in its infancy, may have found more promise in such places than in the unpredictable open. Consider the contrast. The surface is exposed, subject to storms, predators, rival groups, shifting seasons. To settle above is to risk. To settle below is to gain stability, constant temperature, concealment, silence, protection from winds that tear and floods that erase. Underground, the walls do not change with weather. They hold, they endure. For a band of early humans, such qualities would have seemed less strange than reassuring. The earth itself could become a roof, a barrier, a shield, and yet the question lingers like a whisper. Would people have chosen to begin their story there? Imagine a child born in a cavern, never seeing a horizon. For that child, the ceiling of stone is normal, comforting, familiar. The surface, if spoken of at all, may sound terrifying. Too open, too bright, too uncertain. Stories told by elders might frame the underground not as exile but as sanctuary, the only true home. If a society were to root itself in such an environment, it would not perceive deprivation but belonging. The analogy is quiet, a planet holding its breath. In caverns, air moves slowly, regulated by fissures and pressure. Life would slow with it. Days and nights would blur, replaced by rhythms of tasks, meals, chants, fires tended. Civilization could take shape in such stillness, measured not by sunrise but by the pattern of voices in the dark. The absence of the sky would not prevent culture. It might even intensify it, as people find meaning in echoes, in flickering shadows, in rituals designed to anchor them. Skepticism arrives gently, as it should. If such a civilization existed, why no trace? Why no ruins or artifacts unearthed? The counterpoint is preservation bias. On the surface, structures may be revealed by erosion, sand, or shifting rivers. Underground, collapses seal chambers forever. Floods wash away markings. Rockfalls erase tunnels until they are indistinguishable from natural formations. Evidence hidden beneath sediment becomes unreachable. An entire society might dissolve into geology, leaving at most ambiguous anomalies that science cannot easily interpret. This possibility reframes absence. Lack of proof is not necessarily proof of lack, though it also cannot be mistaken for presence. The ladder of evidence here remains at the lowest rung, anecdotal, imaginative, mythic. To climb higher would require signals. soot deposits in unreachable places, isotopic excursions hinting at fire use, tool marks carved in inaccessible walls. Yet those signals, if they exist, may remain sealed behind kilometers of stone. Thus, the question becomes not only did such a civilization exist, but also could we ever know? Time shifts the scale further. Human history stretches tens of thousands of years. Geological history stretches billions. Any fragile mark left underground might be swallowed by processes we barely measure, and yet myths across cultures continue to echo with visions of subterranean life. Greek tales of Hades, Mayan visions of Xibalba, Norse layers beneath Yggdrasil, Tibetan Shambhala, all speak of worlds below. Perhaps they are no more than projections of fear and longing. Perhaps they are faint cultural memories of real encounters with underground habitation. The ambiguity itself is telling. Generation after generation, people return to the idea as though it carries some unextinguished truth. What emerges is less a claim than a tone, a way of seeing. To imagine the earth not only as surface, but as layered sanctuary changes how one feels walking upon it. Each step may cover a chamber that once held voices. Each field may rest above what was once a hall. To pause with this thought is to feel small, but also connected, to a history that may never be proven yet persists in imagination. Civilization may have begun in sunlight, or it may have begun in shadow. Either way, the underground is part of our inheritance, carrying both our dead and our possibilities. The section closes not with conclusion, but with breath, a suspension. The earth below our feet remains mostly unseen, a vastness more intimate than the sky, and in that unseen volume, the idea of a first civilization waits, not as certainty but as a question, alive in silence. The mind, when it turns toward the hidden, begins to trace shapes in darkness. To speak of a civilization beneath the ground is not to picture a few scattered families huddled in a cave. It is to imagine something more. Organization, culture, continuity across generations. Civilization, after all, means more than survival. It means rules, memory, art, ritual, and a sense of belonging larger than the individual. To ask if such a thing could have first unfolded underground is to ask whether stone corridors could once have echoed with all the qualities we associate with human society. A baseline fact steadies us again. Archaeologists define civilization, not only by tools or dwellings, but by complexity. Surplus food that frees some from constant labor, social organization that arranges roles, symbols that carry meaning beyond the moment. On the surface, these arise with agriculture and settled villages. But underground, the path might look different. Instead of fields stretching to the horizon, there might be chambers carefully balanced for mushrooms, pools stocked with fish, storerooms carved in cool stone, and rituals performed by firelight. The architecture of community would be vertical, layered, contained. A speculation can take two branches. In one branch, underground civilization is seen as reactive, people driven below by climate, predators, or enemies. In this version, the underground is refuge, a defensive posture that hardens into permanence. In the other branch, it is proactive, people choosing the underground because they see in it a natural stability, a foundation that the open air cannot promise. Both are possible. Both speak to resilience and creativity. The detection signal is faint but worth naming. If early humans truly built an organized life underground, we might expect unusual distributions of soot deep in cave ceilings, far beyond where ordinary shelter would require light. We might find repeated carvings, not isolated figures, but sequences that suggest record-keeping or shared myth. We might even detect shifts in isotopes where large groups cooked, ate, and breathed together, leaving chemical shadows in stone. None of these would prove a civilization outright, but together they could suggest intentional life woven through the depths. A confounder immediately arises. Natural caves themselves are deceptive. Water carves channels that look like corridors. Minerals form pillars that resemble columns. Rockfall creates what seem like rooms. To mistake these for design would be easy. The test is repetition, symmetry, tool marks, patterns beyond chance. And yet, much of the underground remains unmapped. Even today, explorers descend into chambers never before touched by light. What they see is often surprising enough without adding speculation. A red team voice interrupts. If humans had lived in numbers underground for long, the resource demands would have been immense. Without fields, how to support large populations? Without sunlight, how to sustain long-term health? The counterpoint is not certainty but possibility. Populations might have been smaller, tightly managed, bound by discipline. Such groups could have existed for centuries without leaving monuments, like pyramids or cities on plains. Their legacy might be silence rather than stone. The analogy softens the edges. A civilization underground would be like an ember hidden within ash. On the surface, fire flickers and dies in wind. Below, sheltered, it glows steadily, unseen but enduring. The image helps us feel what data cannot yet prove, that beneath the chaos of the surface, life might once have chosen quietude. An implication whispers through, if civilization began underground, then our story is one of emergence, not invention. The surface world would not be where culture first blossomed, but where it later migrated, carrying with it habits of order, ritual, and cooperation forged in darkness. In this telling, fields and temples above ground are descendants of halls and hearths below. What remains most striking is not certainty, but resonance. When people today stand at cave mouths, they often feel the urge to enter, to explore, to imagine. That impulse may be more than curiosity. It may be memory, faint but persistent, of a time when stone, not sky, was the backdrop of human community. The question of an underground civilization, then, is not only about archaeology. It is about identity, about whether part of us has always belonged in shadow. The section settles with quiet patience. Civilization in shadow is not proven, but it is thinkable. And to think it is already to feel differently about the ground beneath. The earth is not mere support, but a possible cradle, a place that may once have held the first stirrings of society, unseen, enduring, deep in stone. Caves are among the oldest doors humanity has ever opened. They are thresholds without hinges, entrances carved not by hand but by time, leading inward rather than outward. To step into one is to feel a shift of gravity, not the physical pull of the earth, but a psychological tug that draws the mind away from open sky and toward the hidden. Why this pull? Why do humans across so many eras and geographies feel both fear and fascination at the mouth of a cavern? The baseline fact is clear. Caves exist everywhere, from limestone regions eroded by water to lava tubes left behind by ancient flows. The planet offers innumerable hollows, some vast enough to hold entire cities. For early humans, they were among the first ready-made shelters, naturally cool in heat, warm in cold, and shielded from predators. To find such a space would have been like discovering a room already prepared, a refuge needing only fire and vigilance. The utility explains part of the pull, but not all. A hypothesis expands. Caves attract not only because they protect, but because they evoke. Darkness beyond the threshold stirs the imagination. A cavern feels less like shelter and more like another world. Entering one is like crossing a border, where familiar senses weaken and new possibilities emerge. The flicker of a torch reveals shapes that seem alive. Shadows deepen mystery. Echoes create the impression of presences unseen. In such conditions, even survival-driven people would have felt awe. That awe lingers still. Detection signals of this fascination are preserved in art. Paleolithic caves in Europe bear paintings deep inside, far beyond practical dwelling zones. Herds of bison, outlines of hands, abstract signs, all created where darkness is total, where effort was required to bring light. This indicates that caves were not only shelters but sanctuaries of meaning. People carried pigments, climbed narrow passages, endured risk, simply to leave images in hidden chambers. Such acts suggest reverence, a pull that was cultural as well as practical. Confounders exist. Some caves were indeed mere shelters, temporary stops for hunters. Others were used as storage or burial sites. Not every mark on stone is sacred. Yet, the pattern across continents, art deep underground, ritual deposits, signs of repeated visits, suggests something more than convenience. The cave itself seems to have been central to the experience, not incidental. The Red Team voice asks, does fascination mean civilization? Not necessarily. Attraction to caves could explain ritual, art, or temporary refuge without implying full societies below. And yet, fascination is often the seed of settlement. If people were drawn again and again into the earth, if they felt belonging there, then permanence was possible. Curiosity can become home. The analogy whispers, caves are like the heartbeat of the planet, pulsing quietly beneath the skin. To enter them is to press one's ear against the earth and listen. For early humans, this sensation may have been irresistible, a call to dwell within rather than above. An implication emerges. If our ancestors felt this pull strongly enough, then imagining civilization underground is less of a leap. The groundwork was already laid in psychology, in art, in ritual. The underground was never neutral space. It was charged with significance. That charge might have been enough to anchor entire communities. On the human timescale, caves are places of passage, entered, used, abandoned, rediscovered. On the geological timescale, they are stable, enduring long after surface structures have weathered away. This duality may explain the enduring allure. They feel timeless, as though stepping into one is stepping out of ordinary history. For a society seeking continuity, such timelessness would be precious. The section eases toward stillness. The pull of caverns is not a claim, but a feeling, recorded in pigment, in story, in the way footsteps echo differently underground. Civilization may not have begun there, but it could have. And even if it did not, the attraction itself is enough to keep the question alive. Every cave mouth remains an invitation. From the beginning, humans have sought places to rest that offered more than the open sky. Trees shielded against rain, overhangs against wind, but stone gave something deeper: enclosure, protection, permanence. The record of archaeology confirms it. Some of the oldest traces of human habitation are found in caves, where fire pits, stone tools, and food remains accumulate across layers of sediment. These are not the grand ruins of cities, but quiet evidence that stone was the first architecture, not by design, but by discovery. The baseline fact is steady. Caves provided consistent temperatures. In climates where surface life swung violently between heat and cold, stone interiors held close to a median. For fragile bodies without abundant clothing or constructed homes, this was safety. The predictable stability of underground environments. Reduced risk, allowing longer stays, larger groups, and eventually traditions tied to place. Shelter was not just a pause in migration, it could be a foundation. A hypothesis divides. One path is that caves were temporary sanctuaries, used seasonally, as hunters followed herds. Another path is that some groups remained longer, finding enough resources nearby to stay, and in staying, building the beginnings of settlement. If so, then stone became not only backdrop but participant, walls that shaped routine, ceilings that gathered smoke, chambers that held memory. The detection signal here lies in patterns. Archaeologists note hearths built in the same spots generation after generation. Ash layers accumulate, tools scatter, bones pile in corners. This repetition suggests continuity. A cave was not simply stumbled upon anew each time. It was remembered, returned to, relied upon. Stone itself became familiar, perhaps even named, its features woven into story. A confounder arises. Animals, too, seek caves. Bears, hyenas, wolves have left bones and scratch marks that sometimes confuse the record. Distinguishing human use from natural occupation requires careful work. Tool scars instead of tooth marks, fire residues instead of random charring. But when these distinctions are clear, the evidence points strongly. People did live within. Stone. A Red Team critique asks, is this enough to suggest civilization? A hearth does not make a society, nor do stone tools imply culture beyond subsistence. Yet the step from temporary shelter to community is subtle. Repeated use of the same spaces fosters memory, and memory creates attachment. The cave becomes more than geology. It becomes home. And home is the seed of civilization. The analogy surfaces softly. Stone as cradle. Unlike branches that fall or tents that collapse, stone holds, immovable, unyielding. For those first humans, it must have felt eternal. To entrust one's life to stone was to lean on something far older than oneself, as though the earth itself were a parent. The implication whispers forward. If people learned to trust stone as shelter, the leap to shaping entire communities underground becomes smaller. Civilization may not have sprouted there fully formed, but its roots twined through these first safe enclosures. From them grew traditions of return, of gathering, of carving meaning into walls that would outlast the breath of those who made them. Time provides another lens. On the human scale, a cave might hold one family for a winter, a tribe for a few years, or generations who leave traces for millennia. On the geological scale, the cave itself has existed far longer, waiting before human arrival, enduring after departure. This mismatch reinforces the sense of continuity. People come and go. Stone abides. Perhaps that endurance itself suggested the possibility of a civilization that could last, not in fragile huts above, but in chambers below. The section quiets here. Stone as shelter is a fact, but within the fact is an opening, an invitation, to wonder whether stone was not only a resting place but a starting place, a stage upon which humanity's earliest social experiments might have taken form. Beneath the ground, walls already stood. All that was needed was fire, voice, and the decision to stay. When people speak of the first art, they often point to cave walls. The Chauvet Cave in France, the caves of Altamira in Spain, the deep chambers of Lascaux, all carry images painted tens of thousands of years ago. Animals with delicate outlines, herds in motion, handprints pressed against stone. What is striking is not only the age of these works but their location. They were not made at cave mouths, where daylight reaches. They were made deep inside, where total darkness rules, where torches or oil lamps were required. Art was born not in open meadows but in hidden chambers, surrounded by silence. The baseline fact: creating such art required deliberate effort. Pigments had to be gathered, torches lit, scaffolds built to reach ceilings. These were not idle markings. They were collective acts, carried out with planning, knowledge, and purpose. And purpose is the mark of culture. One hypothesis says the art was ritual, Depictions of animals meant to guide hunts, petitions to unseen forces dwelling in the stone. Another suggests it was storytelling, a way of preserving memory, passing knowledge of species and seasons to those not yet born. Either way, the implication is that meaning, not just survival, was central. Beneath the earth, people were already shaping symbols, already imagining beyond the immediate. Detection signals of this practice are abundant, pigments still visible after millennia, soot marks on ceilings, broken torch fragments on cave floors. Archaeologists trace where light was placed, where hands worked together. These traces demonstrate communities willing to venture into spaces where no practical need demanded they go. They went because the underground called them to express, to create. A confounder must be noted. Not all caves contain art, and not all art was made underground. Surfaces, cliffs, open-air rock shelters also carry carvings and paintings. So the underground was not the exclusive birthplace of creativity. Yet the density of major early artworks in deep caves suggests that darkness itself played a role in their emergence. Something about the enclosed silence sharpened imagination. The Red Team critique insists, cave art does not prove civilization underground. It proves ritual, yes, symbolic thinking, yes, but not organized societies hidden below. And still, the counterpoint is subtle. Civilization is not a binary, but a gradient. To gather in darkness and create shared symbols is already a step toward the social cohesion that underlies complex society. The analogy arrives quietly. A torch in a cavern is like a star in night sky. It illuminates more than its surroundings. It creates orientation, a focal point for gathering. In that glow, people became more than individuals. They became participants in something collective, something enduring. An implication whispers, if art began underground, then human imagination itself may have been shaped by shadow. The walls of caves were the first canvases, the first galleries, the first records of meaning. Civilization, in this sense, has always had roots in darkness. Time adds its perspective. The paintings remain tens of thousands of years later, astonishing in freshness, while the lives of their makers have vanished entirely. What survives is not the campfire or the tool, but the symbol. And because those symbols were placed underground, they endured. The earth preserved them, sealed from weather and sun. Stone became archive. The section rests with this thought. Art in darkness is more than decoration. It is the record of a mind reaching beyond necessity. It shows that humans, even in earliest memory, felt compelled to mark the hidden, to transform stone into meaning. If this impulse is part of us, then imagining a civilization underground is less of a leap. For civilization is, at its core, the decision to shape the world with symbols as much as with tools. And that decision was first, carried deep into caves where torchlight met stone and images bloomed in darkness. Stone has always been more than shelter. It has also been keeper. When humans began to bury their dead, they turned instinctively to the ground itself. Graves carved into soil, chambers hollowed in rock, pits filled with bones and offerings. These are among the earliest traces of ritual. To bury is to acknowledge continuity, to say that life is not only breath but remembrance. And the underground, silent and unchanging, became the natural place for that remembrance to reside. A baseline fact steadies us. Across continents, burial practices are ancient and widespread. In Shanidar Cave in Iraq, Neanderthals placed their dead with flowers more than 60,000 years ago. In European caves, human remains mingle with tools, pigments, and animal bones, suggesting not only disposal but ceremony. The underground was not merely convenient storage, it was chosen again and again as the realm where ancestors belong. Two hypotheses explain this pull. One is practical. Burial below ground protects remains from scavengers, disguises odor, prevents disease. The other is symbolic. Earth itself becomes gateway, a passage from life to whatever lies beyond. The soil receives, the stone conceals, and the living imagine a journey. These two motives, practical and symbolic, may have merged, reinforcing the act until it became sacred tradition. Detection signals of such practices are clear in the archaeological record: deliberate placement of bodies, consistent orientation, inclusion of tools, ornaments, or pigments. These signals distinguish burial from mere abandonment. They show intention, ritual, respect. They reveal that underground spaces became archives of memory, repositories not only of bones but of meaning. Confounders remain. Natural cave collapses can scatter bones. Water can carry remains into hollows. Animals can drag carcasses inside. Distinguishing accident from ritual requires care. Yet the repetition of burial across sites, the patterns of adornment, the positioning of bodies, all argue strongly for deliberate practice. A red team critique offers caution. Burial does not. Equate to civilization. Animals too bury food, protect dens, return to familiar sites. But humans imbued burial with symbolic weight, turning stone into story. Civilization is not only about surplus and agriculture, it is also about shared frameworks of meaning. Burial demonstrates that humans imagined beyond immediate survival, organizing their relationship with death in ways that shaped community. The analogy drifts softly. The underground as library. Each grave is a volume, each chamber a shelf. The earth itself, the archive of lives once lived. To descend into a burial cave is to walk among texts written in bone and ochre, stories preserved not in ink but in silence. An implication rises. If people already trusted the earth to hold their ancestors, they may also have trusted it to hold themselves. The same stone that keeps memory might keep the living. Civilization underground could have begun not with fear of predators, but with reverence for the ground that already cradled their dead. To live among ancestors might have felt natural, even protective. Time extends the thought. Burials endure for millennia, often long after surface traces vanish. A wooden hut rots, a mound erodes, but a skeleton sealed in stone remains, a whisper from tens of thousands of years ago. In this sense, the underground is not only archive but time capsule, stretching memory beyond the limits of human generations. Civilization rooted here might remain invisible, yet its spirit persists in the persistence of bones. The section slows to quiet. Burial and memory entwine in darkness. The act of placing the dead underground may have been the first true cultural consensus, an agreement that life is not only lived but remembered. If so, then the earth was not just a shelter, but the first monument, the first temple, the first city of the dead. And in imagining that city, it becomes easier to imagine that the living, too, once built their lives in stone. Above ground, the world is restless. Winds shift, rains fall, rivers flood, and seasons wheel across the land with indifferent rhythm. For early humans, this meant exposure. A sudden storm could destroy food stores, a drought could empty rivers, a predator could appear without warning. The surface was abundance, but also volatility. Beneath, by contrast, the earth offered something different: stability. Temperatures held steady, walls did not collapse with weather, and change was measured not in days but in geological time. To imagine a civilization born underground is to imagine one rooted in that promise of constancy. A baseline fact anchors the vision. Caves typically maintain temperatures close to the annual average of the surface above. In regions with burning summers and freezing winters, underground chambers rest in mild, unwavering coolness. For humans without advanced clothing or architecture, this would have been more than comfort. It was survival. To step underground was to step out of the chaos of seasons into an environment the body could predict. Two hypotheses present themselves. 1. People sought caves as temporary refuge, returning only when weather or conflict demanded. 2. People chose permanence, building routines, storage, and community around the reliability of stone. In the first case, the underground was fallback. In the second, it was foundation. The second is what makes the idea of underground civilization plausible. Where stability is found, permanence may follow. The detection signal would be traces of sustained presence, food storage pits carved in floors, channels directing water, soot layers repeated over centuries, signs of construction beyond mere shelter. These would suggest not only that people hid underground, but that they trusted the stability enough to invest in it, altering space to suit their needs. A confounder must be acknowledged. The underground is not free of danger. Rockfalls occur. Caves flood. Air grows stale. The impression of stability is real but partial. A sudden collapse can erase a community entirely. Yet, compared to storms, fires, and predators above, these risks may have seemed manageable. It is a question of relative safety. Chaos above, steadiness below. The red team voice intrudes. Stability may protect, but it also limits. Agriculture thrives in light and open space. Large populations require surplus that the underground cannot easily provide. Stability, in this view, is constraint. Civilization, if defined by scale and expansion, seems more suited to the open. Eat sky. Yet another definition of civilization, cohesion, continuity, ritual, fits within the underground's slower rhythm. Perhaps our surface assumptions bias us toward scale. A smaller, disciplined society may be no less a civilization. The analogy settles. The underground is like the steady pulse beneath a racing heartbeat. Surface life quickens and slows with seasons. Underground life could beat evenly, predictably, without strain. For those weary of chaos, that steadiness might have been irresistible. An implication whispers, if humanity's first communities took form underground, then the character of civilization itself may have been shaped by stone's stability. Cooperation, ritual, patience, qualities suited to a world where change comes slowly. Even when people later emerged to build under the sky, those qualities might have lingered, inherited from ancestors who learned them in darkness. Time adds another lens. To a single generation, stability underground feels eternal. To geology, it is fleeting. Caves expand, collapse, transform. Yet, for human purposes, the underground is as close to permanence as the earth offers. To live in such constancy is to grow accustomed to continuity, perhaps even to imagine that society itself could endure without upheaval. The section rests on this thought. The promise of stability is not glamorous, but it is profound. For fragile beings seeking a place to endure, stability may have been the first luxury, and underground, stone provided it freely. Civilization might have begun not with the chase of abundance, but with the embrace of calm. If the idea of people living underground feels fanciful, history offers reminders that it is not. Across the Anatolian Plateau in central Turkey lies a region carved by volcanic stone, soft, porous, easily worked by human hands. Here, for centuries, people did not merely hide in caves, they built entire underground cities. Cappadocia, with its winding tunnels and vast chambers, demonstrates that the earth itself can become architecture, that communities can carve stability and security from rock. The baseline fact, archaeologists have uncovered networks such as Derinkuyu and Kemakli, subterranean cities large enough to house tens of thousands. These were not shallow shelters but complex systems stretching many levels deep, with ventilation shafts, storage rooms, stables, wells, and even chapels. Far from primitive, they were deliberate, planned, and resilient. Life underground was not an accident, but a choice. Two hypotheses explain their origins. One suggests necessity. Waves of invasion pushed people to carve hidden refuges where they could disappear for weeks or months. Another suggests adaptation. The harsh Anatolian climate, with scorching summers and cold winters, made underground life efficient, conserving energy and resources. Whether protection or practicality was primary, the result was the same. Whole. Communities sustained below the surface. Detection signals are unmistakable. The walls bear tool marks. The shafts align for airflow. Storage rooms still show niches for jars and food. Evidence of grinding stones, presses, and hearths indicates not mere refuge, but prolonged habitation. These were not desperate improvisations. They were engineering feats. A confounder is worth noting. Cappadocia's underground cities date not to the dawn of humanity but to historical periods, possibly as early as the Bronze Age, developed and reused across centuries. They are not first civilizations, but they prove possibility. If later societies could sustain life below, earlier ones might also have attempted it, even if their works have not endured. The Red Team critique replies, Cappadocia's examples relied on surface connections, air shafts, trade routes, farming above. They were extensions of surface society, not independent civilizations hidden from it. The underground here was complement, not origin. This is a fair caution, and yet the lesson remains. Humans are capable of shaping entire habitats beneath stone when the need arises. The analogy is clear. Cappadocia is like an echo of a deeper past, a memory that humanity might have tried something similar long before, in cruder but comparable ways. The fact that such structures exist today tells us the idea of underground life is not invention but recurrence. An implication whispers, if later people found safety, stability, and community underground, why not earlier ones, less equipped but more motivated by necessity? The blueprint is already written in stone. Derinkuyi's labyrinth is a testimony that the earth itself can host a city. Time bends the perspective. The cities of Cappadocia were occupied, abandoned, reoccupied, forgotten, and rediscovered. Their presence today is reminder that underground, worlds can vanish from memory, hidden until chance uncovers them. If such amnesia is possible over a span of mere millennia, how much more might have been lost if attempts at subterranean civilization occurred tens of thousands of years earlier? The section pauses here, quietly holding Cappadocia as both precedent and parable. Humans have lived beneath stone in organized, enduring ways. That alone makes the thought experiment of a first civilization underground less speculative, more grounded. The imagination has scaffolding now, not just dream, but history carved in volcanic rock. Civilization, whether above or below ground, begins with water. On the surface, rivers draw settlements, lakes anchor villages, and rainfall sustains crops. Underground, the same truth holds, but the sources are less obvious. Instead of open streams, water trickles through cracks, gathers in aquifers, pools in hidden chambers. The earth itself becomes a vessel, carrying its own veins of liquid through stone. If the first civilization lived below, it would have followed these veins as faithfully as any river on the surface. The baseline fact is plain. Much of the world's fresh water resides underground. Aquifers beneath continents hold vast reserves, often more stable than surface supplies. Caves commonly host rivers and lakes formed by seepage from above, sometimes stretching for kilometers. For early people who learned to find and manage them, these hidden waters could have been lifelines. Two hypotheses unfold. One suggests underground groups relied on constant trickles and pools, collecting droplets in carved basins, storing them in cisterns lined with clay or stone. Another imagines communities deliberately positioning themselves around subterranean rivers, using them not only for drinking but for food, catching fish, gathering crustaceans, cultivating algae. In both cases, water dictated settlement, just as it does above ground. The detection signals would be subtle but tangible. Cisterns carved into rock, channels etched to guide flows, smoothing on stone walls where jars or skins scraped repeatedly. Chemical traces in sediments could reveal long-term human use. Charcoal from fires, waste minerals, shifts in isotopes linked to habitation. Such signals, if found deep enough, might whisper of communities organized around hidden springs. Confounders appear quickly. Water seeps naturally, carving smooth hollows and channels without human touch. Distinguishing natural erosion from deliberate shaping can be difficult. Only repeated patterns, symmetry, tool marks, clustering, can separate human craft from geology. Without them, water's work alone might be mistaken for civilization. The red team note raises the obvious. Underground water is unpredictable. Springs dry, rivers flood, pools stagnate with minerals or microbes. Depending solely on them would have been risky. And yet, people have always adapted to water's variability. Surface civilizations managed floods with dikes and canals. Underground, ones might have learned to shift chambers, seal reservoirs, or migrate along veins. The analogy settles softly. Water underground is like breath through the body of the earth, circulating unseen, quiet yet constant. To follow it is to trace the earth's own rhythm, aligning human life with the slow pulse of stone. An implication stirs. A community underground would have known water not as horizon, but as presence. A drip echoing in silence, a pool glimmering in torchlight. Their myths might not have celebrated rivers flowing under the sun, but springs that emerged from the heart of the world. For them, water would not fall from sky, but rise from earth, sacred and intimate. Time magnifies the thought. Aquifers last, millennia, slowly replenished by rain filtering from above. A civilization could endure along such veins far longer than surface groups dependent on erratic storms. The constancy of water underground matches the constancy of temperature, reinforcing stability. The two together form foundation, predictable climate, steady supply. Enough, perhaps, to anchor society. The section rests here, with the sound of dripping water echoing in imagined chambers. Civilization underground would have lived by that sound, measuring time not in sunrises but in steady drops. Stone held water, water held life, and so, in the veins of the earth, the first currents of society may once have flowed. If underground life were to flourish, food would be the most constant question. Above, the sun powers fields of grain, orchards, and pastures. Below, the sun never enters. No stalks reach upward, no leaves unfold. And yet life continues in darkness, feeding on what falls or filters down. Here, fungi become teachers. They are neither plant nor animal, but something between, thriving without sunlight, breaking down matter into nourishment. To imagine a civilization underground is to imagine fungi as bread, a quiet staple grown in shadow. The baseline fact: fungi do not photosynthesize. They draw energy from decomposing organic material, wood, leaves, dung, even rock surfaces enriched with minerals. In caves, mushrooms sprout in dampness, nourished by what water and animals carry inside. Some glow faintly with bioluminescence, illuminating their own habitat. This independence from sunlight makes them ideal candidates for underground. Subsistence. Two hypotheses emerge. One imagines deliberate cultivation. Early people gathering organic scraps, perhaps waste from meals or remains of animals, and spreading them to encourage mushroom growth. Over time, chambers might have been designated as fungal gardens, harvested in cycles. The other imagines opportunistic reliance, people recognizing naturally occurring mushrooms as food, supplementing diets of fish or insects with their dense, nutritious flesh. Both are plausible, and both would have given underground communities resilience against scarcity. Detection signals would include spores embedded in sediments, concentrations of fungal remains in chambers used by humans, or even residues of controlled compost heaps. These would be faint traces, but if found in conjunction with hearths and tools, they could suggest intentional farming in darkness. Confounders must be considered. Mushrooms also grow naturally where conditions suit them. Their presence alone is not evidence of cultivation. Distinguishing wild growth from managed gardens would require patterns, repetition, clustering near human activity, or evidence of soil preparation. Without such indicators, the line between nature and nurture blurs. The red team critique is practical. Fungi provide calories and nutrients, but not in abundance comparable to fields of grain. Could they support a civilization? Perhaps not on their own. Yet civilizations need not mirror our expectations of scale. Smaller groups, disciplined and cooperative, could have sustained themselves on a combination of fungi, insects, fish, and occasional forays above. Survival is not surplus. It is balance. The analogy drifts gently. Mushrooms are like small moons rising in darkness, pale and quiet, nourished not by light but by decay. To gather them would have been like harvesting stars from the earth itself, each cap a reminder that life persists even where the sun does not shine. An implication arises. For people underground, fungi may have been more than food. They may have been symbols of renewal, proof that death feeds life, that decay transforms into sustenance. Myths could easily have grown from this cycle, placing fungi at the center of cosmology, sacred bread born from stone. Time gives the thought weight. Fungal spores endure for long periods, drifting invisibly, waiting for moisture. Gardens underground could regenerate season after season, requiring little beyond patience. For a community seeking stability, this reliability would have been invaluable. Mushrooms may not have offered abundance, but they offered endurance. The Tiun section quiets here, imagining chambers lined with pale fungi, glowing faintly in torchlight, harvested carefully, shared among families. Civilization does not always require golden fields beneath the sun. Sometimes it requires patience in shadow, gathering nourishment from what the earth quietly provides. In such patience, fungi may have been the bread of the first hidden world. Fungi offered bread to an underground people, then water could offer flesh. In the hidden rivers and lakes beneath the earth, life persists even without the sun. Blind fish, pale salamanders, and other cave-adapted creatures dwell in total darkness, their bodies changed by millennia of isolation. Eyes shrink or vanish, pigmentation fades, senses of touch and vibration sharpen. They are not accidents of nature but products of patient adaptation. To imagine a first civilization underground is to imagine these creatures not only as companions in darkness, but as food, sustenance drawn from waters unseen by the sky. The baseline fact, troglobitic species, organisms adapted to permanent cave life, are found across the world. Blind cavefish in Mexico, Proteus salamanders in Slovenia, albino crabs in Romania's Moviel Cave, all thrive without sunlight, feeding on microbial mats or detritus carried by water. Their ecosystems are small but self-contained, demonstrating that life can stabilize in places sealed from the surface for millions of years. Two hypotheses suggest themselves. The first, underground people could have fished and hunted these species. building knowledge of their habits and relying on them as protein sources. The second, they may have tried to manage them, capturing live fish in rock basins, encouraging, breeding, perhaps even creating rudimentary aquaculture. Though speculative, the principle follows human patterns. Wherever people found resources, they sought to shape and sustain them. Detection signals, if ever uncovered, might include concentrations of fish bones in underground layers, cut marks on remains, or modified pools near habitation sites. Such evidence would suggest not mere chance predation, but deliberate use. Even residues of fish oil in pottery could whisper of long-forgotten meals eaten far below the surface. Confounders are obvious. Animals sometimes fall into caves or are washed into chambers by floods. Bones alone do not prove sustained hunting. Only repetition, pattern, and association with tools or hearths would strengthen the case. Absence of such evidence may be less about non-existence than about difficulty of preservation. Fragile remains in damp stone often dissolve without trace. Red Team Voice reminds us, cave ecosystems are fragile, producing limited biomass. To depend entirely on them could never support large populations. At most, they could supplement diets of fungi and insects. But for small groups, carefully balanced, the yield might have been enough. Civilization need not mean vast numbers. It can mean continuity, culture, and shared survival within constraints. The analogy drifts quietly. A blind fish is like a thought moving in darkness, navigating not by sight, but by subtle vibrations. To catch and eat such a creature would be to take into oneself the lesson of adaptation, that life does not need eyes to see, only sensitivity to the world it inhabits. An implication follows. For underground people, these animals may have carried symbolic weight. Their blindness could have been interpreted not as deficiency but as wisdom, an ability to live without illusion, perceiving only what is essential. Myths might have revered them as guides or warned of them as omens, even while relying on them for food. Time widens the perspective. Troglodytic species evolve slowly, their changes written across thousands of generations. A civilization underground, even if temporary on the human scale, would have encountered creatures shaped by eons of darkness. To share space with such beings is to enter into continuity far older than humanity itself. The section rests here. Fish without eyes swim silently in their black rivers, embodying endurance without sun. To imagine humans living alongside them is to imagine a civilization sustained not only by cleverness, but by acceptance, learning from creatures that thrive where most life cannot. In their silence, in their blind persistence, the possibility of human survival underground finds a mirror. Darkness underground is complete. Unlike the surface night, where stars pierce and the moon reflects, in caves there is no relief. The absence is total, swallowing all sense of distance. For any civilization below, light would have been both necessity and symbol, the thread keeping community alive. Fire is the obvious answer. Torches, lamps, hearths. But fire consumes air and leaves soot. To live long in chambers, people would have needed more subtle solutions. One possibility, grounded in nature itself, is bioluminescence, organisms that make their own light, glowing in the hush of stone. The baseline fact is steady. Fungi, insects, worms, and even some bacteria emit natural light. Glowworms hang threads in caves to trap prey, painting ceilings with constellations of green. Certain fungi glow faintly in damp wood, an eerie radiance called foxfire. In marine darkness, countless creatures shimmer, proof that light without the sun is possible. On land, these flashes and glows show that nature already carries lanterns into shadow. Two hypotheses unfold. One imagines early humans observing these organisms and gathering them. perhaps lining chambers with glowing fungus or keeping jars of captured fireflies. Another imagines a more deliberate path, attempts to cultivate luminous fungi in niches, encouraging their spread, harvesting both their glow and their symbolism. In either case, bioluminescence could have offered a gentle, sustainable light, supplementing the harsher flame. The detection signals would be faint. Residues of glowing fungi are fragile, unlikely to persist, but niches carved in stone, residues of organic material in unlikely patterns or cultural depictions, symbols of glowing orbs, perhaps etched in wall art, might hint at such practices. Absence of clear evidence does not erase possibility. The delicate nature of bioluminescence means its traces are destined to fade. Confounders emerge. People may simply have relied entirely on fire with no bioluminescent aid. Glowworms and fungi might never have been abundant enough to matter. Natural occurrences in caves today do not prove deliberate human use. Yet the very fragility of the signal matches the subtlety of the light itself, quiet, almost ungraspable. The red team voice interjects, even if bioluminescence existed, it could not have replaced fire for cooking, warmth, or defense. At best, it was decorative or supplemental. True enough. But culture is built as much from symbols as from needs. A glow in darkness, no matter how dim, may have carried significance beyond utility. The analogy drifts. Bioluminescent light is like the memory of stars carried underground, faint sparks reminding those below of a cosmos they no longer see. Each glowworm thread, each luminous cap, would have been a star transposed into stone. An implication follows. For an underground people, such light might have shaped myth. They could have imagined spirits dwelling in glowing fungi, ancestors returning, as sparks, rivers of stars flowing not in the sky but in walls. Light underground would have been not neutral but sacred, a gift against the void. Time softens the view. Fire leaves soot that endures. Bioluminescence leaves nothing but memory. If underground civilizations existed, much of their illumination may have vanished utterly, leaving us no clue. What remains is the possibility, the soft suggestion that stone once shimmered with living lanterns. The section slows here. Imagine a hall of darkness where flames are extinguished and faint points of green begin to glow. Voices gather around, not straining against the void, but resting within it, comforted by light that is alive. Civilization underground may have been lit not only by fire, but by organisms that carried the stars into the earth. If fire, fungi, and glowing creatures could provide light, and if rivers could offer water, still one element remained most urgent: air. In the surface world, it is taken for granted, a constant flowing presence that renews itself with wind and sky. Underground, air becomes fragile. It lingers, enclosed, quickly fouled by fire, breath, and decay. A civilization hidden in stone would have faced this invisible limit: how to breathe and how to keep breathing when the walls themselves do not exhale. A baseline fact steadies us. Caves exchange air with the surface through cracks, fissures, and pressure changes. Some breathing. Caves visibly exhale in summer and inhale in winter, responding to temperature differences. Others stagnate, collecting carbon dioxide until unsafe. For small groups with occasional visits, natural circulation suffices. For a sustained community, it becomes a matter of design. Two hypotheses arise. 1. Early people may have learned to seek caves with strong natural drafts, using their corridors and vertical shafts as ventilation systems. Another, they may have deliberately modified spaces, digging vents, widening cracks, creating chimneys to pull smoke upward. Even simple structures like torches placed at passage mouths could generate convection, drawing air deeper in. These adaptations, modest by modern standards, could have been enough for survival. Detection signals might be unusual shafts in cave systems that cannot be explained by water erosion, narrow vertical tunnels aligned for airflow, or concentrations of soot that suggest smoke was directed purposefully rather than allowed to accumulate. Such patterns, if discovered, would hint at an understanding of air long before science named it. Confounders remain. Many caves already possess natural drafts. Distinguishing human intervention from geological accident is delicate. Erosion can mimic design, and collapses can distort original forms. What appears intentional may be coincidence, but repetition, symmetry, or association with hearths would strengthen the case. The red team critique cuts deeper. Air management underground is precarious. Fires consume oxygen rapidly. Carbon dioxide builds invisibly. Could a large population have endured without modern tools? Perhaps not at scale. But small, disciplined groups might have rotated spaces, restricted fire use, or relied more on bioluminescence and carefully tended embers. A civilization need not resemble cities above. It could have been smaller, quieter, adapted to the rhythm of air. The analogy whispers, air underground is like a held breath. Too long, and life falters. Too short, and the breath is wasted. To live in such a place would mean learning to breathe with the earth itself in careful balance. An implication follows. Such dependence would have shaped culture. Fire might have been sacred, carefully rationed, never wasted. Rituals may have marked the opening of vents, the stirring of drafts, the return of freshness after suffocation. Air itself would have been part of myth, perhaps imagined as a spirit, moving through stone, a guest that must be welcomed and never angered. Time shifts the scale. On a geological time scale, caves exhale steadily, indifferent to human presence. On the human time scale, a single night with too much smoke could end a community. This tension between the patience of stone and the urgency of breath would have structured daily life. Civilization in such a place would mean living always with awareness of limits, careful not to cross them. The section rests gently. Air underground is invisible, delicate, finite. Yet even here, humans might have found ways to adapt, to listen to drafts, to carve passages, to honor breath as life's most precious measure. Civilization beneath stone would have been not only a matter of food and water, but of breathing slowly, carefully, in rhythm with the earth itself. On the surface, the sun is the great metronome. It lifts and falls, marking day from night, season from season, guiding migrations, planting, harvest, ritual. Underground, the sun never rises. No dawn breaks chambers of stone. No shadow stretches, and contracts with the hours. To live there is to live outside the clock of the sky. For a civilization rooted in darkness, time would have required new measures, new rhythms, new inventions to replace the absent sun. The baseline fact: humans carry circadian rhythms, internal clocks tied to light. Without cues, experiments show, our cycles drift. Some people extend to 25 hours, others collapse toward shorter loops. In caves where volunteers have lived for weeks, they often lose track of days entirely, sleeping and waking in patterns, alien to surface life. The body, unanchored, creates its own time. Two hypotheses unfold. 1. An underground society might accept drift, allowing individuals to follow their internal rhythms, weaving community through flexible gatherings rather than fixed schedules. Another, they might impose artificial markers, rituals at set intervals, the burning of measured lamps, the dripping of calibrated water clocks, the sounding of gongs echoing through chambers. In both, time becomes culture, not nature. Detection signals would be subtle. Artifacts of timekeeping found underground, marks etched at intervals on stone, deposits of soot in patterns suggesting deliberate pacing of lamps. Even the repeated renewal of torches in predictable cycles could be a signal, faint but telling. Confounders must be noted. Natural cave features, steady drips, echoing acoustics, might mimic or inspire human attempts at measurement. Distinguishing between accident and design would be difficult. Yet the very attempt to measure, to impose order, is part of what makes a community civilized. A red team critique interjects, without agriculture, the need for rigid calendars may not have been pressing. Hunting, gathering, and fungal cultivation could adapt more flexibly. Perhaps timekeeping was unnecessary. And yet, even without crops, humans long for rhythm. Ritual requires repetition, memory requires markers. Without them, continuity frays. The analogy drifts softly. Underground time is like a river without banks, flowing, directionless, until hands carve grooves to guide it. Civilization, in this metaphor, is the act of grooving, of shaping flow. You into pattern, an implication arises. To live without sunrise might have changed consciousness itself. Surface cultures look upward, outward, to sky and season. An underground culture might look inward, to the pulse of the body, the cycle of breath, the echo of footsteps. Their myths might not revolve around solar gods but around timelessness, cycles without beginnings or ends. Time across scales complicates the thought. Geological time has no sun. Caves form in darkness over millions of years. Human time is fleeting, seeking anchors. In the underground, the two scales meet. Bodies, yearning for rhythm, stone indifferent to rhythm. Civilization caught between them would create its own solutions, its own calendars of flame and chant. The section closes quietly with the image of people gathered in a chamber, lighting a lamp not for brightness but for measurement, marking the passing of an interval they agree to call a day. In the absence of sunrise, time itself becomes invention. Civilization underground would not only shelter in stone, it would redefine what it means to live in time. Caves are beginnings, but not always sufficient. A hollow may shelter a family, a cavern may host a gathering, yet civilization requires more than chance voids. It requires rooms for different purposes, spaces that shape activity, passages that connect. To imagine life underground maturing into society is to imagine stone not just as shelter, but as architecture. Something modified, expanded, given order by human hands. The baseline fact, rock, though formidable, is workable. With stone tools, with patience, with fire and water fracturing, early humans could widen passages, carve niches, create storage hollows. Later societies proved this more clearly. Underground temples in India, Nabatean tombs in Petra, Cappadocian cities, all testaments that stone can be shaped into intentional form. Even without iron, slow work could transform natural caves into designed environments. Two hypotheses emerge. In one, underground people lived mainly in natural formations, but gradually modified them, smoothing floors, expanding openings, stabilizing ceilings. In another, they deliberately carved new chambers, envisioning layouts beyond what chance geology provided. Corridors leading to central halls, spaces for storage, places for ritual. The first is adaptation, the second creation. Both are possible. Both leave traces. Detection signals would include tool marks inconsistent with natural erosion, symmetry in chamber design, alignments suggesting planning. Archaeologists already find niches carved for lamps, alcoves for offerings, benches hewn from rock. If such signs were found in deeper strata, far older than known civilizations, they could hint at a forgotten chapter of architecture in darkness. Confounders abound. Water carves arches that mimic halls, collapses form alcoves that look like benches. Humans are prone to see intention in accident. The test, as always, is repetition and coherence. One symmetrical wall may be coincidence. A network of aligned chambers suggests design. A red team critique warns, carving stone requires immense labor. Could small, early groups spare the energy? Would survival not demand simpler shelters above? Perhaps. But necessity drives ingenuity. A single chamber carved over decades may have served generations. Stone keeps labor's imprint long after. Wood and hide decay. Even minimal modifications could signal the birth of architecture below ground. The analogy rises softly. Stone architecture underground is like carving lungs into the earth, hollow spaces where life can breathe. Each chamber is an inhalation, each passage an exhalation, turning inert rock into organism. An implication flows. If civilization underground took root, its monuments would be less visible than pyramids or ziggurats. They would be hidden beneath, invisible until rediscovered. Our assumption that civilization must build upward may blind us to the possibility that some built downward, etching permanence into silence rather than skyline. Time expands the view. Surface cities erode in centuries. Underground carvings endure millennia. A hall cut in stone could persist far longer than mud brick walls. If traces of the first civilization remain anywhere, stone beneath the earth may still hold them, disguised as geology until someone notices pattern. The section rests with a quiet image, hands chiseling slowly in torchlight, turning rough stone into usable space. Civilization does not demand towers or palaces. It demands the shaping of environment into continuity. In that sense, the first architecture may not have risen above the ground, but sunk into it, carving permanence and shadow. To live underground would mean learning restraint. On the surface, a group might wander to new lands when resources thin, or follow herds across plains. Below, movement is constrained. Chambers are finite, air fragile, water limited, food slow. To grow. A civilization born in stone could not thrive through expansion. It would have to endure through balance. Survival would depend not on conquest, but on discipline, a constant awareness of limits. The baseline fact: closed ecosystems require equilibrium. Modern experiments, such as sealed habitats, show how quickly imbalance develops. Carbon dioxide rises, microbes multiply, nutrients vanish from soil. Caves themselves demonstrate delicate balance. Certain species exist only because humidity, mineral content, and temperature remain stable. To inhabit such places, humans would need to join that balance rather than break it. Two hypotheses arise. In one, underground communities survived by strict rationing, careful management of water, food, and air, enforced by cultural norms or ritual law. In another, they developed systems of rotation, using different chambers at different times, allowing environments to recover. Either way, survival depended on restraint, not excess. Detection signals might include patterned waste disposal areas, evidence of rotation in hearth sites, or unusual consistency in tool reuse. Such traces would suggest people who valued conservation, who maintained systems over long spans rather than exhausting them. Confounders appear. Some patterns may be byproducts of chance. Limited space naturally forces reuse, while geological shifts may mimic human planning. What looks like deliberate discipline may have been imposed by circumstance. Yet if continuity is visible, centuries of stable presence, then balance was likely more than accident. The red team critique is pragmatic. Human groups often exploit until collapse. Evidence of overhunting, deforestation, and resource depletion abounds in history. Why imagine early humans underground were more disciplined? The counterpoint is necessity. On the surface, collapse could be answered by migration. Underground, There was nowhere else to go. Limits were visible, immediate. Discipline may have been forced, not chosen, but it still structured society. The analogy flows gently. Underground life is like walking across a narrow bridge over an abyss. Each step requires attention. Each mistake is costly. To survive is to move deliberately, carefully, together. An implication follows. Such discipline could shape culture itself. Rules may have been sacred, rituals enforcing restraint, taboos protecting air and water. What we call myth may have been the memory of ecological law, encoded in story. Civilization underground may have been less about growth and more about harmony, an ethic of balance born from necessity. Time shifts the scale. On the human scale, discipline may feel restrictive, even harsh. On the geological scale, it could allow continuity across centuries, communities persisting in the same chambers without collapse. If such a civilization existed, it would not have left ruins sprawling across landscapes, but subtle traces of continuity etched within stone. The section settles quietly. Civilization does not always mean expansion or abundance. Sometimes it means restraint, patience, a willingness to endure within limits. If the first civilization lived underground, its true achievement may not have been grand architecture or wealth, but the discipline to live in balance with the earth's breath. In the dark, sound becomes more than voice. It is orientation, memory, reassurance. A torch illuminates only what is near, but a chant travels through chambers, marking distance, binding people across space unseen. If civilization began underground, its culture may have grown not from monuments of stone or fields of grain, but from sound. Songs that echo, reverberating against walls, filling voids that otherwise swallow silence. A baseline fact steadies the thought. Caves alter sound profoundly. A whisper can carry as if amplified, while a shout can dissolve into layered echoes. Archaeologists studying painted caves often find the most elaborate art placed where acoustics are richest, as though sound and image were joined. The walls did not only receive pigment, they received vibration, making the underground a natural amphitheater. Two hypotheses arise. One imagines underground communities using sound as communication, guiding movement in dark corridors, calling across chambers where sight fails. Another imagines music as ritual. Chants repeated to mark time, lull children, sanctify gatherings. In both, sound is not accessory but foundation. Where the sun is absent, echo becomes compass. Detection signals linger faintly even now. Certain caves hold soot marks and paintings exactly where resonance is strongest, suggesting intentional pairing of sound and space. Percussion instruments, stones worn smooth where they were struck, fragments of flutes carved from bone, have been found near cave dwellings. These artifacts imply that music was not occasional but integral. Confounders must be noted. Natural preference may explain the pattern. People simply linger where acoustics feel pleasant, without ritual intent. Not every sound marks civilization, yet the consistency of pairing, art where echoes are rich, instruments nearby, suggests something deeper than chance. The red team critique raises a challenge. Sound is fleeting. Unlike stone carvings, it leaves no enduring record. Reconstructing a culture from echoes risks projecting our own sense of beauty. Still, the counterpoint is that humans have always invested in sound, from lullabies to ceremonies. If anywhere, underground its role would have been heightened, not diminished. The analogy floats gently. A cave is like a vast instrument, its hollows resonating like strings. People living inside would not only hear sound, they would inhabit it, each movement, setting the chamber to vibrate. Civilization here would be less like building walls and more like composing music. An implication arises. Identity in such a world might not rest on sight or outward display but on shared rhythm, the recognition of familiar voices and chants. Songs may have carried history, law, and myth, binding people without need of writing. Echo itself would have been archive, preserving sound in memory as stone preserved art. Time shifts perspective. On the scale of a single moment, an echo fades in seconds. On the scale of tradition, echoes persist as songs taught across generations. Civilization underground may have preserved itself not through stone monuments but through living sound, ephemeral yet continuous. The section closes softly, with the image of a chamber filled not with light but with voices, harmonies weaving. Through stone, echoes returning as if the earth itself sang along. Civilization in shadow may have been a civilization of resonance, its memory not in ruins, but in the reverberation of songs that once filled the dark. Across cultures, stories lead downward. Heroes enter caves, gods dwell in underworlds, ancestors wait beneath the soil. From Greece to Mesoamerica, from Siberia to the Pacific, myth imagines the world below not as empty but as inhabited, sometimes terrifying, sometimes sacred. If civilization ever began underground, these myths may be not invention alone but faint echoes of memory, refracted through generations, reshaped by imagination. The baseline fact: descent into darkness is among humanity's oldest narrative motifs. In Homer's Odyssey, Odysseus travels to Hades to seek counsel from the dead. In Mayan tradition, the hero twins descend into Xibalba, the underworld of trials. In Japanese myth, Izanagi pursues Izanami into Yomi, a shadow realm of death. These stories arise independently, yet converge. The underground is more than geology. It is threshold realm, counterpart to life above. Two hypotheses explain this pattern. 1. Myths of descent are purely symbolic, projections of mortality, the inevitability that all bodies return to Earth. Another, myths encode cultural memory of real experiences, burials, rituals in caves, perhaps even lives lived partly underground. In the first, the underworld is metaphor. In the second, it is memory disguised. Detection signals can be traced in ritual practice. Sacred caves served as pilgrimage sites, offerings placed deep within chambers, fires lit for ceremonies. Archaeologists find deposits of pottery, bones, and pigments far beyond habitation zones. These suggest not casual visits but organized rites, connecting myth with physical spaces. Confounders remain. Not every cave ritual implies descent into a literal underworld. Symbol and practice intertwine in ways difficult to separate. A cave may represent the womb, the grave, the unknown. To leap from myth to memory is tempting but uncertain. The Red Team critique presses, myths are universal because death is universal. They require no historical origin, only human imagination. The counterpoint is that universality does not preclude memory. Symbol and history may coexist, myth serving both as explanation of mortality and as echo of lived tradition. The analogy drifts gently. Myths of descent are like shadows on water, distorted, fluid, yet cast by something solid above. Whether that solid form was burial practice, cave habitation, or collective imagination remains unclear. But the shadows themselves are unmistakable, spread across time and geography. An implication emerges. If myths preserve memory, then humanity may have carried underground origins into its stories long after leaving the caves. The idea of hidden realms, of societies below, may be less fantasy than cultural residue, a persistence of memory too distant to prove, too deep to erase. Time sharpens the paradox. On a human scale, myths evolve with each telling, reshaped by storytellers. On the geological scale, caves endure unchanged. The stories may drift, but the stone that inspired them remains. Civilization underground, if it ever existed, would not need ruins to persist. It would live in story, in descent myths whispered at firesides, generation after generation. The section rests here. Myths of descent are not evidence, but they are atmosphere, recurring motifs that make the underground feel inhabited even in absence. To listen to them is to hear faintly what might once have been real. People shaping life below, remembered through story as the realms of gods and the dead. Every cave begins with an entrance, a liminal zone where light fades and shadow grows. To step across that line is to move from one world into another. Fear gathers at such thresholds. The open landscape allows vision. Danger can be seen from far away. The cave mouth conceals, swallowing sight, inviting the imagination to populate. The dark with unseen threats. For a civilization underground, this tension, shelter, and terror combined would have been inescapable, shaping ritual, story, and psychology. A baseline fact, studies of human perception confirmed that darkness amplifies fear. The mind evolved to detect motion, contrast, silhouette. In absence of these, it projects. Sounds echo without source. Shadows thicken into forms. Early humans entering caves would have felt both refuge and dread, drawn in by stability, repelled by the unknown. That ambivalence is written across myth, where caves are entrances not only to safety, but to underworlds. Two hypotheses can be posed. 1. Thresholds of fear were obstacles overcome, with courage rituals or initiation ceremonies marking the passage inside. Another, thresholds were themselves sacred, liminal sites where offerings were placed, acknowledging danger as divine. In both, fear was not erased but integrated, turned into structure for belief and practice. Detection signals might include clusters of artifacts near cave mouths, tools, pigments, bones, suggesting that rituals focused on entrances rather than deep interiors. Repeated deposits in these liminal zones could reveal the cultural weight of thresholds, points where fear and reverence converged. Confounders must be considered. Animals also frequent cave mouths, leaving remains that complicate interpretation. Natural floods and sedimentation can concentrate debris near entrances. Distinguishing ritual deposits from accident requires care. Still, patterns across multiple sites strengthen the case that thresholds were significant. The Red Team critique notes, fear discourages settlement. If caves evoked dread, why imagine people chose to live there permanently? The counterpoint is simple. Fear and attraction are not opposites but twins. What frightens also fascinates. Humans return again and again to liminal places, shorelines, forests, mountains, not despite their dangers, but because danger imbues them with meaning. Underground life may have carried fear as a constant companion, woven into daily ritual. The analogy softens the idea. A cave mouth is like the pause between inhalation and exhalation, a moment of tension, neither in nor out. To live underground would mean learning to breathe through that pause, to accept uncertainty as home. An implication follows. A civilization rooted in stone might have cultivated fear deliberately, using it to teach discipline, to bind communities, through shared rites of passage. Children led to thresholds, voices chanting to soften dread, offerings left to appease what lurks beyond sight. These could have been ordinary acts, shaping identity as much as survival. Time widens the view. Thresholds endure as long as caves exist, but fear evolves. What once evoked terror may become sacred, then forgotten, then rediscovered with wonder. The oscillation mirrors culture itself, shaped by thresholds, transformed by them, never fully released. The section settles here, with the quiet image of a cave entrance at dusk, its dark mouth both forbidding and inviting. Civilization underground would not have banished fear, but lived with it, shaping it into ritual, carrying it as part of belonging. In that balance, fear becomes not obstacle but foundation, the shadow at the edge of every home in stone. Darkness is not empty. It has texture, weight, presence. In the absence of light, the human mind begins to paint its own landscapes, projecting fears and visions, bending perception. For a civilization underground, this was not an occasional condition, but the constant environment. Darkness shaped thought as surely as stone shaped walls. To imagine such a society is to imagine psychology transformed, an inner world molded by the absence of sun. A baseline fact: prolonged darkness alters human cognition. Experiments with sensory deprivation show hallucinations, distorted time perception, heightened sensitivity to sound and touch. In underground settings, volunteers often report dreams that feel more vivid, waking states that blur with imagination. The brain, starved of external cues, generates its own. For early people, this effect would not have been a laboratory anomaly, but daily life. 2 hypotheses emerge. 1. Underground groups adapted by embracing altered perception, incorporating visions and hallucinations into ritual, perhaps treating them as messages from spirits or ancestors. Another, they developed practices to anchor themselves, chants, rhythmic labor, measured lamps, to resist the drift of mind into uncertainty. In one path, darkness was doorway, in the other, discipline. Both could coexist, weaving stability from both imagination and order. Detection signals might include ritual objects linked to trance, drums, rattles, pigments used in body painting, found deep underground. Wall art itself, with its shifting forms and abstract symbols, may record visions born in shadow. Even repeated geometric patterns in carvings could be echoes of entoptic imagery, the shapes the brain produces when deprived of light. Confounders abound. Not every abstract mark is vision-inspired, not every pattern is hallucinatory. Some may simply be decoration, practice, or accident. Still, the recurrence of certain motifs across sites suggests a shared source, possibly the mind itself, responding to darkness. The Red Team critique points out, psychological strain may have discouraged permanent underground habitation. Prolonged darkness can disorient, depress, and destabilize. Why choose such a path if it unsettles the mind? The counterpoint: humans adapt. What begins as strain may become tradition, structured into myth and ritual, reshaped until it feels not harmful but sacred. The very challenges of darkness may have given underground life its depth of meaning. The analogy surfaces softly. Darkness underground is like an unmarked page. The mind, unable to rest on visible lines, writes its own. What emerges are stories, visions, memories projected onto the void. For an underground civilization, the page was endless, the writing unceasing. An implication follows. Culture below might have leaned inward, valuing dreams, visions, and inner journeys more than surface. Societies do. If sunlight civilizations are outward-facing, measuring time by stars, defining themselves by horizons, then shadow civilizations would be inward-facing, measuring by echoes, defining by visions. Their mythologies might read like extended dreams, born of the psychology of darkness. Time offers perspective. A single night underground alters mood. A month reshapes rhythm. Generations would mold entire traditions. Darkness would not simply challenge. Over centuries, it would sculpt. Civilization born here might appear alien to us not because it was primitive, but because it was shaped by a world without dawn. The section quiets with this thought. In stone. Chambers, where no light intrudes, imagination swells to fill the void. Civilization underground would be less about walls and more about minds, forged in shadow, expanded by the psychology of darkness. For early humans, the landscape was divided by thresholds. Forests ended in plains, plains in rivers, rivers in seas. Each boundary suggested both danger and possibility. Among the most powerful of these edges were caves, openings into the unknown. To stand at the mouth of a cavern was to face a different kind of horizon, not vast and open, but narrow and descending, leading into depth rather than distance. For a civilization underground, this sense of edge would not have been peripheral. It would have been central. A baseline fact, in anthropology, liminal spaces, zones of transition, are where rituals cluster. Doorways, crossroads, river fords, and cave mouths all function as thresholds, points of crossing from one realm to another. Archaeological records confirm this. Offerings, pigments, and artifacts often accumulate in caves not deep within but at entrances, as if the threshold itself was the sacred point. Two hypotheses follow. 1. Caves were treated as edges of the known world, symbolic borders between life and death, day and night, safety and danger. In this case, underground civilization may have framed every entrance as both gate and guard. Another, caves or marb, not only symbolic edges, but literal edges of territory, boundaries of community, where outsiders were met and exchanges occurred. The threshold, then, was both mythic and practical. Detection signals might include concentrations of ritual deposits at entrances, hearths clustered near openings for both light and vigilance, or architectural modifications, walls, barriers, markers that emphasize the cave mouth as boundary. Such patterns would suggest deliberate acknowledgement of liminality. Confounders complicate interpretation. Cave mouths naturally attract animals, floods, and sediment, all of which leave dense remains. Distinguishing human ritual from natural accumulation is difficult. Still, the repeated association of symbolic activity with entrances strengthens the idea that thresholds mattered. The Red Team critique voices skepticism. If caves were edges, would not people avoid them, living instead in open land where edges are fewer? Why, imagine civilization choosing to dwell in liminality? The counterpoint is that humans are drawn to thresholds precisely because they offer duality. Safety within, openness without. A community might thrive on that balance, both hidden and connected. The analogy drifts softly. A cave mouth is like the seam of a garment, holding two fabrics together. Neither fully inside nor fully outside, it binds worlds. To live underground is to live at that seam, weaving identity from both shadow and light. An implication follows. If underground civilizations existed, their culture may have defined itself through edges. Myths, laws, and stories could emphasize boundaries between life and death, sound and silence, inside and outside. Their worldview might see every threshold as sacred, every crossing as ritual. Time adds a wider lens. For surface people, horizons shift constantly as migrations continue. For underground people, horizons are fixed, bound by entrances. Yet those entrances might have taken on cosmic meaning, enduring as symbols of origin, passage, and return. Long after communities vanished, the myth of edges would remain, feeding later tales of underworlds and hidden realms. The section pauses here. Civilization underground, if it existed, may not have been defined by vast fields or monuments, but by thresholds, edges of the known world where identity crystallized. To step into shadow was not only movement in space, but passage in meaning. At those edges, society was both born and sustained. Across mythologies, the cosmos is imagined as layered. Above is the sky. Below is the underworld. Between them lies the middle world where humans dwell. Binding them together, many traditions describe a great axis, a tree, a mountain, a pillar, its roots descending deep, its branches stretching high. Norse stories speak of Yggdrasil, the world tree with roots in realms of shadow and frost. Mayan texts describe the Ceiba tree, linking the heavens, earth, and Xibalba below. Hindu cosmology envisions Mount Meru, central axis of the worlds. These images are not confined to one culture. They repeat like echoes, suggesting a shared intuition. What lies beneath is as essential as what lies above. A baseline fact. In comparative mythology, vertical cosmologies are nearly universal. They reflect natural observation. Roots plunge. Downward, trees reach skyward, mountains anchor horizons. Yet they also reflect cultural need to situate humanity within a larger structure, binding life and death, light and dark, surface and depth. Two hypotheses arise. 1. These myths are symbolic projections, explaining natural growth and decay, embedding human mortality in the cycle of roots and branches. Another, they carry faint memory of real relationships with the underground, burials, cave rituals, perhaps even habitation, transformed into cosmic allegory. In this view, world trees and cosmic mountains are poetic translations of lived experience below. Detection signals are indirect. Ritual sites aligned with sacred trees or mountains often connect to caves beneath, suggesting the symbolism is not abstract but grounded in geography. Offerings at roots, shrines at mountain bases, subterranean chambers beneath temples all point to physical enactment of layered cosmologies. Confounders complicate matters. Trees and mountains dominate every landscape. Their symbolic centrality requires no reference to underground life. Myths may simply universalize what is visible, without hidden memory. The recurrence of layered worlds may be coincidence of shared observation, not inheritance of subterranean origins. The Red Team critique presses, myths adapt fluidly. To claim they preserve memory of underground civilization risks reading too much into metaphor. Yet the counterpoint remains. Myths often encode fragments of practice, refracted through generations. Even if not literal memory, they may reflect an ancient intimacy with the underground. The analogy rises softly. A tree is like a mirror of humanity itself, feet rooted in earth, head lifted to sky, body suspended between. Civilization underground would have felt this duality intensely, living among the roots, seeing them not as metaphor but as neighbors. An implication follows. If underground life shaped cosmology, then the idea of layered worlds may be more than abstraction. It may reveal how people once understood themselves, not solely surface dwellers but participants in a continuum from root to branch, shadow to light. Civilization in stone may have taught them that depth matters as much as height, that the unseen sustains the visible. Time stretches perspective. Trees grow and fall within centuries. Myths of trees persist across millennia. Stone endures even longer. If humanity once lived underground, the memory may not survive in ruins, but in these recurring images. Roots binding us downward, branches upward, worlds layered like chambers of a cavern. The section rests gently here, the world tree, the mountain, axis, the cosmic root. These may be symbols only, or they may be echoes of experience, shadows of societies that once lived where roots entwine. Civilization underground, if it existed, may still live in myth, disguised as trees and mountains that link all realms. In more recent centuries, myths of hidden kingdoms beneath the earth have persisted, evolving into names like Agartha and Shambhala. These are not caves merely for shelter or burial, but imagined realms of wisdom and order, concealed from the surface world. Agartha appears in esoteric traditions as a subterranean empire, vast and radiant. Shambhala, rooted in Tibetan lore, is sometimes placed beneath mountains, a sanctuary of enlightenment hidden from the unready. Though modern retellings embellish with fantasy, the persistence of such images suggests a deeper current. The underground remains a place where people locate origins, refuges, or higher civilizations. The baseline fact: cultural traditions across Eurasia and Asia speak of hidden realms beneath. Tibetan Buddhist texts describe Shambhala not as a literal city, but as a subtle world, accessible only to those with purified perception. In European esotericism of the 19th century, Agartha became a symbol of hidden wisdom, a subterranean mirror of surface empires. These traditions differ in detail but share a theme. Depth conceals not only danger but enlightenment. Two hypotheses emerge. 1. Such myths are purely symbolic, metaphors for inner states of mind, journeys into spiritual depth rather than geographic stone. Another, they preserve echoes of ancient associations with underground life, memories of societies that once found stability below, magnified into legends of utopias concealed in earth. The first explains them as allegory, the second as cultural residue. Detection signals are cultural, not geological. Texts, oral stories, pilgrimages to mountains or caves, rituals marking hidden realms. Archaeologists have found offerings placed at cave entrances in Tibetan regions, suggesting that thresholds into stone retained spiritual weight. Whether these acts honored memory or symbol is uncertain. Confounders abound. Romantic retellings. From Western occultism exaggerated Shambhala into hidden empires, often distorting original traditions. Agartha, in particular, may owe more to modern imagination than to ancient memory. Distinguishing authentic cultural origin from later layering is essential. The Red Team critique argues these myths prove nothing about actual underground civilizations. They demonstrate only that humans project desires into hidden spaces, desires for refuge, wisdom, continuity. The counterpoint is gentle. Projection itself may arise from familiarity. If ancestors lived below, the memory may persist not in ruins, but in longing, in stories of places safe from surface turmoil. The analogy drifts quietly. Agartha and Shambhala are like mirages of the mind, oases glimpsed in the desert of uncertainty. They may not exist in stone, but they quench a thirst for meaning, for a realm where civilization survives untouched. An implication stirs. Even if purely symbolic, such myths shape how cultures imagine history and destiny. The underground becomes not exile, but sanctuary, not tomb, but seedbed of renewal. If a first civilization lived below, its faint echo might appear precisely in myths of hidden wisdom. Societies remembered not as failed, but as preserved in secrecy. Time reframes the thought. Myths evolve over centuries, layered with interpretation, reimagined by each age, yet their core image endures, a hidden realm below, concealed yet powerful. That persistence itself is notable. Across the rise and fall of empires, people continue to place hope and mystery in the earth beneath. The section closes softly. Agartha and Shambhala may never have existed as literal kingdoms, yet they keep alive the idea that the underground holds more than stone. Whether allegory or memory, they testify that humanity has never ceased to wonder what civilizations may wait beneath our feet, unseen, enduring, perhaps wiser than we imagine. From time to time, imagination has taken a bolder step. Instead of picturing scattered chambers or hidden cities, It has envisioned the entire planet as hollow, with vast realms inside, lands lit by inner suns, oceans inverted against a concave sky, civilizations thriving unseen beneath our own. The hollow Earth hypothesis, though long dismissed by science, remains one of the most persistent myths of the underground. Its endurance tells us something about human desire. When we face mystery, we tend to imagine fullness, not emptiness. The baseline fact: in the 17th century, Edmund Halley, better known for his comet, proposed that Earth might consist of concentric shells, each with its own atmosphere, possibly inhabited. In the 19th century, explorers and writers elaborated the idea, spinning tales of vast subterranean worlds. Even after geology and seismology disproved such models, the dream lingered in popular culture. Two hypotheses frame its endurance. 1. The hollow Earth is a purely speculative construction, born of scientific ignorance and nourished by literary imagination. Another, it resonates because it taps into something older, perhaps cultural memory of caves as homes, perhaps unconscious, echo of a time when underground life was real. The first sees it as fantasy, the second as disguised remembrance. Detection signals here are textual rather than physical: treatises, adventure novels, expedition reports. None offer credible evidence of actual hollowness, but all show how powerfully the underground invites projection. The very impossibility of the idea seems part of its allure. Confounders are obvious. Geological science confirms Earth's layered structure: crust, mantle, outer core, inner core. Seismic waves prove solidity where myth imagines void. There is no hollow sun, no vast interior continents. Yet the scientific rebuttal does not erase fascination. If anything, it heightens it, because the underground remains largely unexplored, mysterious even without being hollow. The red team critique is sharp. To dwell on the hollow Earth is to risk confusing myth with science. Better to discard it entirely. But the counterpoint is gentle. Myths reveal not what is true, but what is desired. The hollow Earth dream shows humanity's hunger for hidden realms, for societies beyond reach, for the possibility that what we see is not all there is. The analogy surfaces softly. The hollow Earth is like a mirror turned inward, reflecting our longing for depth, for continuity, for another world within this one. It may not exist in rock, but it exists in imagination, which is itself a kind of geography. An implication follows. Even false models can shape exploration. The hollow, Earth-inspired journeys into polar regions, fueled literature, seeded cultural fascination with what lies beneath. If a first civilization truly lived underground, it is no surprise that later ages inflated the idea into whole worlds within worlds. The exaggeration may be myth, the root may be memory. Time widens the view. The hollow Earth dream rose in the Enlightenment, flourished in Romanticism, and persists in science fiction. It adapts to each age, reflecting not geology but psychology. Across centuries, it proves one thing clearly: the underground remains fertile ground for imagination, regardless of evidence. The section rests quietly. The hollow Earth is not real, but it is revealing. It shows that when humans consider the depths, they rarely imagine emptiness. They imagine life, societies, even civilizations, mirrors of ourselves in shadow. And that very tendency keeps alive the question: what if something, once, truly lived there? Dreams of hollow worlds invite wonder, but the stone beneath our feet has its own testimony. Geology, the slow science of layers and forces, serves as gatekeeper between speculation and possibility. If there were vast chambers capable of holding civilizations deep within Earth, geology would know. Rock compresses, faults shift, pressure rises. The crust and mantle do not permit open caverns on planetary scales. What they permit instead are smaller voids, caves, lava tubes, aquifers, habitable, only in fragments. The truth is less fantastic, but perhaps more interesting. Not hollow planets, but scattered sanctuaries. The baseline fact is firm. Seismic waves travel through Earth during earthquakes, their paths bending and reflecting in ways that reveal the planet's interior. From this data, scientists construct a layered model: solid inner core, liquid outer core, viscous mantle, brittle crust. Nowhere does the evidence allow for hollow expanses large enough to house continents. Any such cavity would collapse under pressure or fill with molten rock. Two hypotheses thus emerge for underground life. 1. Civilizations below could only have existed within the crust, in natural or modified voids close enough to the surface for air and stability. 2. Deeper layers may host only microbial life, adapted to heat and pressure, thriving in pores, and fractures but incapable of supporting complex society. Both hypotheses narrow the range. If humanity's first civilization lived underground, it was shallow, close to the world above, hidden yet tethered to it. Detection signals for this reality come from seismology, boreholes, and cave mapping. No vast hollows appear, but countless smaller chambers do, many undiscovered, some vast by human scale, though tiny by planetary scale. These are the true potential habitats, not mythical inner worlds, but real geologies of shadow. Confounders deserve mention. Stories of immense underground realms may originate in rare discoveries of unusually large caverns, such as Vietnam's Son Doong Cave, big enough to host forests inside. When such places are found, it is easy to imagine a whole world of them. But geology insists they are exceptional, not typical. The Red Team critique is clear. With geology's testimony, the idea of deep civilizations collapses. No hidden continents exist below. The counterpoint, however, reframes the question. Civilization does not require continents, it requires continuity, culture, adaptation. Even a network of modest caves, linked by effort, could have hosted a hidden people. The gatekeeper does not close the door entirely. It only narrows the path. The analogy rests quietly. Geology is like the custodian of a vast library granting access only to certain rooms. The hollows it permits are limited, but within them, entire stories might unfold, unseen by the rest of the world. An implication follows. If we accept geology's constraints, the imagination becomes sharper, less extravagant, more attuned to subtle spaces. Instead of envisioning inner suns and hollow planets, we look to aquifers, to lava tubes, to limestone labyrinths. These are real, accessible, and habitable. If the first civilization lived below, it is in such places that its traces might linger. Time stretches perspective. Geological forces close caves as well as open them. Over thousands of years, collapses erase what was once void. Flooding seals what was once dry. Preservation bias tilts against us. What once held life may now appear solid. Civilization underground may have existed within windows of geological time, brief but sufficient, erased before we could find it. The section rests here, with geology standing firm as gatekeeper. It denies fantasy but allows possibility. The earth is not hollow, yet it is riddled with passageways, caverns, veins of water and stone. Within those spaces, small by planetary measure but vast by human scale, the dream of an underground civilization can still breathe. The assumption that sunlight is indispensable runs deep. Plants lean toward it, animals chase it, human calendars rise and fall with its rhythm. Yet beneath oceans, beneath rocks, beneath miles of sediment, life persists without the sun. To imagine, A civilization underground, we must first accept that life itself does not require light. The Earth already proves this in places where darkness is permanent and ecosystems flourish nonetheless. A baseline fact steadies the vision. In the depths of the ocean, around hydrothermal vents, whole communities thrive on chemosynthesis rather than photosynthesis. Instead of sunlight, bacteria draw energy from chemicals: hydrogen sulfide, methane, iron. Around them cluster tube worms, crabs, clams, each feeding on the microbial abundance. In darkness, life finds new pathways. 2 hypotheses emerge. 1. Underground ecosystems parallel these marine systems, with microbes feeding on minerals and sustaining higher life. 2. Early humans, if underground, could have tapped into such systems indirectly, consuming animals and fungi nourished by chemical rather than solar energy. In this way, their food webs would not be severed by absence of sunlight, but rerouted through geology. Detection signals exist already. Caves such as Movile in Romania host sealed ecosystems isolated for millions of years, their air rich in hydrogen sulfide, their life built on chemosynthetic bacteria. Springs bubbling from deep. Fractures often host microbial mats, evidence that energy flows underground without the sun. These are not speculations but realities, small but undeniable. Confounders must be acknowledged. Most chemosynthetic systems are fragile, limited in productivity compared to sunlight-based ones. They can sustain specialized species, but not large, complex communities. For human populations, they might have provided supplement, not abundance. Still, supplement may have been enough. Civilization need not mirror the vast surplus of surface agriculture. It may have been modest, steady, sustainable. The Red Team critique presses. Underground ecosystems cannot generate the biomass required for human societies. Perhaps microbes and cave fish exist, but their numbers are insufficient. The counterpoint is balance. A small group, carefully managing fungi, insects, fish, and chemosynthetic supplements, could endure. Civilization may not have been vast, but it could have been real. The analogy flows softly. Chemosynthesis is like a secret fire burning in stone, unseen yet steady. It is life's proof that energy wears many faces, that the sun is not the only. Lantern. An implication rises. If humans once lived underground, their worldview may have embraced this hidden vitality. Instead of worshiping the sun, they may have revered the earth's own breath, the gases, minerals, and hidden fires that sustained their food chains. Their cosmology could have placed energy not in sky, but in stone. Time reframes the thought. Chemosynthetic systems endure as long as geology allows. Thousands, even millions of years. A civilization drawing from them might last only briefly, but even brief existence is enough to imprint memory. Perhaps myths of hidden fire, inner light, or breath of the earth trace back to such encounters. The section slows here. Life without sunlight is no longer speculation but fact, proven in oceans, caves, and crust. Civilization underground would have known this not as theory but as necessity. To live in shadow is possible, because life itself has already shown the way. The first civilization may not have needed the sun at all, drawing instead from the quiet alchemy of stone. Beneath our feet, life extends far deeper than most imagine. Not only in caves or aquifers but kilometers into the crust, microbes persist, thriving in heat, pressure, and chemical scarcity. This vast realm is called the deep biosphere, and it contains more carbon in living cells than all surface life combined. To ask whether a civilization could exist underground is to remember that life already does, immense, unseen, unlit, yet enduring. A baseline fact. Drilling projects and boreholes have revealed microbial life more than 5 kilometers below ground. These organisms feed on hydrogen from water rock reactions, on methane trapped in pores, on sulfates dissolved in fluids. They live slowly, dividing perhaps once in centuries, yet their numbers are astronomical. Earth's crust is not inert, but alive, humming with microbial communities that make up a hidden majority of the planet's biomass. Two hypotheses arise. 1. Early humans could not directly live at such depths, but they may have unknowingly tapped into the upper fringes of this biosphere, benefiting from gases, minerals, or microbial byproducts carried upward. 2. Awareness of microbial abundance was irrelevant, yet the principle proves feasibility. If life thrives underground in such quantity, then larger organisms, including humans, could too, provided they found niches closer to the surface. Detection. Signals of the deep biosphere are chemical. Isotopic signatures in rocks showing microbial metabolism, methane of biological origin, hydrogen gradients where cells persist. These are not speculative. They are measured, cataloged, and mapped. Though invisible to the eye, they confirm that Earth's underground is alive on a planetary scale. Confounders must be considered. Microbial life does not translate to human habitability. Conditions that support bacteria, high pressure, limited nutrients, extreme heat, may repel larger organisms. Yet the deep biosphere proves one essential point. The underground is not sterile. It is not void. It is habitat. The red team critique is pragmatic. Drawing parallels between microbes kilometers down and human civilization is tenuous. The counterpoint acknowledges this, yet insists on resonance. The presence of a vast hidden biosphere undermines the assumption that life must cling to the surface. If Earth itself is already hollowed by living systems, the idea of humans once inhabiting part of that realm is less far-fetched. The analogy surfaces softly. The deep biosphere is like the Earth's hidden bloodstream, circulating unseen, nourishing itself in silence. Civilization underground, if it existed, would have been another layer in that flow, part of a continuum rather than an exception. An implication follows. Myths of life below, of realms inhabited, of underworlds filled with unseen beings, may have intuitive roots in this reality. Without knowing microbes existed, people may have sensed that the Earth itself was alive, that something moved in stone. This intuition could have shaped their readiness to imagine civilization underground. Time reframes perspective. Microbes live on scales beyond human reckoning, dividing once in centuries, enduring millions of years. Compared to them, a human civilization underground, lasting even a few centuries, would be brief. A flicker. Yet, against the silence of stone, even a flicker is enough to matter, enough to echo. The section rests gently here. The deep biosphere reminds us that beneath the crust, life already thrives unseen, vast and ancient. Civilization underground would not have been an anomaly, but an extension, another form of life joining the hidden abundance. The Earth below is not empty. It breathes quietly, carrying possibilities as deep as its stone. Among the known examples of sealed ecosystems, few are as striking as Romania's Moveal Cave. Discovered by accident in 1986, it had been cut off from the surface for over 5 million years. Inside, life thrived. Strange, pale, air-breathing. Creatures nourished not by sunlight but by chemosynthetic bacteria feeding on hydrogen sulfide and methane. This place is not myth. It is real, a reminder that the Earth's hidden chambers can host entire ecologies, unsuspected and self-sustaining. If such a world exists today, what might have existed long before? The baseline fact. Moveal Cave contains more than 50 species found nowhere else, many blind, colorless, and perfectly adapted to their chemical niche. The air is low in oxygen and rich in toxic gases, Yet worms, snails, spiders, and millipedes flourish. Their food web begins not with plants but with microbes, forming mats that coat the water's surface. This is life's ingenuity written underground, independent of sun or surface. Two hypotheses extend from this. 1. Movile is exceptional, a rare anomaly created by unusual geological and chemical conditions. Another, it is one instance of a wider pattern. Hidden caves across the planet may host similar isolated biospheres, undiscovered simply because entrances remain sealed. If one cave can persist unseen for millions of years, it is reasonable to imagine others, perhaps larger, perhaps intersecting with human history. Detection signals include chemical profiles, unusual isotopic ratios indicating chemosynthesis, deposits of hydrogen sulfide, microbial mats unlike those of surface ecosystems. These markers allow scientists to identify such systems without direct sight, suggesting that other sealed worlds may already be waiting. Confounders temper the idea. Movile is fragile, its productivity modest. It could never sustain large mammals, let alone humans. To leap from Movile's millipedes to underground civilizations is speculative. Yet the principle holds. Darkness need not mean lifelessness. The underground can generate its own abundance, however limited. The Red Team critique points sharply. Movile is inhospitable to humans. Its gases suffocate, its food webs are narrow. To treat it as model for underground civilization is misleading. The counterpoint softens but persists. Movile is not blueprint but proof of concept. It shows that closed systems in stone can remain stable for geologic spans. If the principle exists, adaptation might find other niches more suitable to human life. The analogy drifts quietly. Movile is like a message in a sealed bottle, carried through millions of years, opened by chance to reveal that life had been writing all along in darkness. An implication follows. If one sealed cave can harbor such complexity, perhaps myths of hidden worlds are less metaphor than intuition. Humans might have stumbled upon smaller, less toxic versions in the past, caverns with streams, fungi, insects, and seen them as realms apart, places already alive before their arrival. Living alongside such worlds, even briefly, might have seeded stories of under-earth kingdoms. Time stretches the lesson. Movile endured isolated for 5 million years. Human civilizations last centuries at most. The comparison humbles. The Earth's hidden biospheres are older, steadier, more enduring than our surface empires. If a first civilization dwelled below, its span may seem small, but in geological terms it shared space with processes vastly older than itself. The section rests here. Movile Cave, real and humming with unseen life, reminds us that the underground is not inert. It can surprise with abundance, with worlds self-contained. To imagine a civilization underground is to stand before Movile's threshold and wonder, not whether it is possible in principle, but whether once the principle was harnessed by human hands. The surface is restless. Winds scythe across plains. Rivers swell and vanish. Forests burn. Seasons alter the very skin of the land. For early humans, such instability was constant challenge. Shelters collapsed, food sources shifted, climate turned cruel. Underground, by contrast, storms are muffled, floods blunted, temperature steadied. In the depths, the chaos of weather loses its reach. To imagine civilization below is to imagine life drawn toward this stability, the promise of endurance when surface worlds shudder. A baseline fact. Caves maintain remarkably constant conditions. Temperature varies little through seasons, humidity stays high, sound is absorbed into stone. In contrast, surface environments can swing tens of degrees between day and night, or shift from drought to flood within weeks. For fragile groups, The calm beneath may have offered survival where storms brought ruin above. Two hypotheses unfold. 1. People sought the underground primarily during crisis: floods, heat waves, glacial winds, returning above when stability resumed. Another. People chose to remain permanently, finding in stone the assurance of constancy. In the first case, the underground is refuge. In the second, foundation. Civilization requires the latter, a decision to trust stability enough to root life within it. Detection signals could include hearths layered through long sequences, indicating repeated or sustained habitation during climactic extremes. Sediment cores showing soot layers aligning with known droughts or floods might suggest people turned inward precisely when the surface faltered. These would not prove full civilization, but they would reveal a pattern of reliance. Confounders complicate the picture. Natural fires and animal remains can mimic human deposits. Some caves may have held water rather than people during certain epochs, obscuring the record. The underground is not universally safe. Floods can invade, ceilings can fall. Stability is relative, not absolute. The red team critique is pointed. Underground life trades surface chaos for new risks. Poor air, limited food, and disease from close quarters may outweigh protection from storms. Why imagine permanence in such places? The counterpoint is balance. Survival is not about perfect safety, but choosing which risks can be managed. Against the vast unpredictability of climate shifts, underground constancy may have seemed the lesser danger. The analogy drifts softly. The underground is like the still eye of a storm, calm while winds rage beyond. To live there is to inhabit, the quiet center, buffered against noise and upheaval. An implication follows. If the first civilization began below, its character may have been shaped by calm endurance rather than restless expansion. While surface peoples chased herds across volatile landscapes, underground peoples may have cultivated patience, rituals of continuity, trust in stone's stillness. Their culture could have prized steadiness over conquest. Time widens the lens. Climate has shifted violently across epochs. The Ice Ages, the Younger Dryas, droughts that ended empires. Surface societies rise and fall with such cycles. Underground, conditions shift more slowly, buffered by rock. A community rooted there could persist long after neighbors above dispersed or vanished. The section rests here. Stability beneath storms is not fantasy, but geology's gift. It does not erase all danger, but it lessens the greatest ones, offering steadiness when the world above writhes. Civilization underground may have found its promise not in abundance, but in calm, the quiet, durability of stone against the violence of weather. Civilization requires more than shelter, food, and water. It requires energy, flows that sustain not just bodies but communities, enabling continuity beyond immediate subsistence. On the surface, energy comes from the sun, feeding plants, warming air, driving cycles. Underground, sunlight never enters, but energy still flows, quiet and unseen, carried by chemistry and geology. To imagine life below is to imagine how people might have tapped into those hidden currents. The baseline fact: chemosynthetic microbes convert chemical gradients into life, feeding on hydrogen sulfide, methane, or iron. Around them gather insects, worms, and fish, weaving food webs without light. Energy flows not from photons but from reactions between water and stone, gases and minerals. The underground, though shadowed, is not static. It hums with quiet chemistry. Two hypotheses extend from this. 1. Early humans underground could have relied indirectly on these webs, consuming animals or fungi nourished by chemical energy. Another, they may have discovered ways to use energy flows more directly, burning methane seeping from rock, collecting mineral residues as fuel, or harnessing heat from geothermal vents. These are speculative, yet they echo known human patterns, finding, adapting, transforming whatever energy is near. Detection signals might include traces of controlled burning where natural gas seeps exist, mineral deposits altered by human handling, or unusual concentrations of soot in geologically active chambers. Such evidence would suggest experimentation with the Earth's own chemical fires. Confounders remain. Natural seepage can ignite spontaneously. Mineral residues may shift without human touch. Distinguishing accident from intention requires patterns, consistent alteration, association with habitation, evidence of control. Without these, nature and culture blur. The Red Team critique presses, even if such energy existed, it would be too limited, too dangerous. Methane suffocates, hydrogen sulfide poisons, geothermal heat scalds. Could early people truly harness such volatile flows? Perhaps not in grand scale. Yet small uses, controlled fires at seeps, warmth from vents, might have been enough to supplement. Civilization need not master energy fully. It need only align with what is available. The analogy drifts softly. Energy underground is like a hidden river, flowing silently through stone. Those who dwell there must learn its currents, sipping carefully, never damming recklessly. An implication emerges. A civilization underground might have grown not from domination of energy, as surface empires grew from sun-fed agriculture, but from intimacy with subtle flows, fungi nourished by mineral trickles, insects feeding on microbial mats, warmth borrowed from stone. Their worldview may have revered balance with energy, not conquest of it. Time broadens perspective. Chemical gradients endure as long as geology shifts water and rock. They are slow but steady, measured in millennia. A human society that learned to rely on them could endure across centuries, quietly sustained by the Earth's hidden metabolism. The section settles here. Energy flows in darkness are less abundant than sunlight, but they exist, enough to whisper possibility. Civilization underground, if it arose, would have been one of restraint, drawing carefully from hidden fires and quiet reactions, learning to live not in abundance but in sufficiency, sustained by the chemistry of stone. In the deep silence of caves, animals have followed their own evolutionary paths. Some visit occasionally, nesting or resting, while others live their entire lives, in darkness, shaped over millennia into forms alien to surface eyes. To imagine civilization underground is also to imagine the companions and resources it would have known, the animals of shadow, creatures adapted to permanence in stone. The baseline fact: cave-dwelling animals are often grouped into three categories. Trogloxines are visitors, bats, bears, swallows, who use caves but depend on the surface. Troglophiles are flexible, living both inside and out. Crickets, spiders, rodents. Troglobites are the true citizens of darkness. Blind fish, pale salamanders, translucent crustaceans, beings whose entire existence unfolds underground. Each group shows a gradient of adaptation, a ladder from surface to shadow. Two hypotheses arise. 1. Underground humans may have relied heavily on trogloxines and troglophiles, hunting or domesticating those that bridged both worlds, using them as conduits to surface productivity. Another, they may have drawn directly from troglobites, learning to fish in blind rivers, gathering pale crustaceans, incorporating them into diet and ritual. Both strategies reflect possibility. One tethered to surface, the other immersed in depth. Detection signals might include concentrations of bat bones near hearths, cut marks on cave bear remains, or layers of insect exoskeletons in human-associated deposits. These would suggest active use of animals as food or material. Even the spread of guano, rich in nutrients, could have fertilized fungal gardens, leaving chemical traces in sediments. Confounders abound. Many caves are natural traps, collecting animal remains without human involvement. Bones washed in by floods or left by predators can mimic human activity. Only association with tools, fire, or patterned deposition can distinguish deliberate use. The red team critique is sharp. Underground animal life is sparse. To sustain humans, it would never be enough. The counterpoint softens but persists. Civilization need not depend on abundance but on complement. A diet mixing fungi, insects, blind fish, and occasional surface forays might have sufficed for small, disciplined groups. The analogy drifts quietly. Animals of shadow are like fragments of dream, half-remembered, incomplete, yet real. They remind us that life does not vanish in darkness but transforms, softening, fading, reshaping. Humans living among them might have felt kinship, seeing their own adaptation mirrored in eyeless fish and ghostly crabs. An implication follows: such creatures, strange and rare, may have entered myth. Blind animals could have symbolized wisdom. Without sight, insight without light. Albino forms might have been sacred, embodying purity of stone. Hunting them may have been ritual as much as sustenance. Culture often grows from the rare, the uncanny, the extraordinary. Time widens the frame. Over generations, humans underground may have watched certain animals vanish. Others adapt. New forms emerge. They would have seen evolution unfolding in shadows, slow but perceptible, teaching patience and continuity. Civilization shaped in such an environment might have woven change itself into myth, not as sudden revolution, but as subtle drift. The section rests gently. The animals of shadow are few, fragile, alien, yet they exist, proving that life finds ways in silence. Civilization underground, if it lived beside them, would have shared in their lessons: adaptation, restraint, endurance without light. To descend into the earth is, in some ways, to step onto another planet. Darkness, silence, unfamiliar life, energies drawn from chemistry rather than sun, these are not unlike conditions scientists expect beneath the crust of icy moons or in the oceans of distant worlds. In imagining a civilization underground on Earth, we find ourselves rehearsing the possibilities of life elsewhere. The subterranean becomes an alien mirror, showing what survival might look like in places beyond our sky. A baseline fact: worlds like Europa, Enceladus, and Titan are believed to host oceans beneath thick shells of ice. These oceans, shielded from sunlight, could be sustained by geothermal heat, much like Earth's deep biosphere. Here, too, life, if it exists, would feed on chemical gradients rather than photosynthesis. In this sense, Earth's caves are not merely terrestrial phenomena, but analogs of extraterrestrial habitats. Two hypotheses extend. 1. Human experience underground has always been a kind of accidental training for the alien, demonstrating that survival is possible in places where sun never shines. Another, if civilizations underground ever did exist, they may serve as direct analogs for what advanced societies could look like on other worlds, organized, disciplined, adapted to shadow. Both paths suggest the underground is not only history, but preview. Detection signals on Earth, microbial mats in caves, blind fish in underground rivers, chemosynthetic life in mobile, are the very signals astrobiologists seek on icy moons. Isotopic shifts, chemical residues, biological films. These may mark not only hidden life on Earth but also alien biospheres. Our underground teaches us how to recognize the unfamiliar. Confounders remind us. Similarity does not prove identity. Earth's caves are linked to a living surface, however distantly. Extraterrestrial oceans may be isolated. subject to pressures and chemistries unlike any on Earth. Yet analogy remains useful, a mirror not perfect but instructive. The Red Team critique raises a caution, comparing human speculation about underground. Civilization with extraterrestrial life risks stretching too far. We know microbes exist. We do not know civilizations can thrive without sun. The counterpoint is modest. Analogy does not claim certainty, only resonance. To consider underground society is to practice thinking about survival, where the familiar is absent. The analogy drifts softly. A cave is like a fragment of space, a pocket of alien conditions embedded within Earth. To enter one is to step briefly into the foreign, to feel what it might mean to live on another world. An implication follows. If humanity's first civilization truly began below, then our species' earliest cultural memory is already extraterrestrial in character. We began not under the sky but under stone, not in daylight but in alien darkness. Perhaps this is why we still look outward with fascination. We have always been, in some sense, children of hidden worlds. Time broadens the thought. Geological. Ages have hidden and revealed underground realms again and again. Planetary time may hold the same for icy moons. What exists below now may one day emerge, or remain forever sealed. In either case, Earth's underground becomes laboratory, archive, rehearsal space for futures beyond. The section closes quietly. To imagine civilization underground is not only to look backward, but forward. The dark below reflects the dark. Beyond, teaching that survival is not tied to light, that life and culture may flourish wherever there is chemistry, patience, and discipline. In this mirror, the alien is already with us, beneath our feet. Every society, whether above or below ground, begins with the same imperatives: air to breathe, water to drink, food to eat, shelter to protect, order to sustain. Civilization is not born from abundance alone, but from the weaving together of these needs into continuity, rituals that secure them, rules that distribute them, meanings that elevate them beyond survival. For an underground civilization, these needs would have taken on sharper edges, more delicate balances, each one tied to the constraints of stone. A baseline fact. Anthropology identifies universal requirements of human groups: subsistence, reproduction, safety, social structure, and symbolic systems. Archaeology shows that even the earliest bands of people created frameworks around these needs: hearths for warmth, burial for continuity, art for meaning. Underground, the same principles would apply but filtered through limitation. Every flame consumes air, every body adds heat, every resource is finite. Two hypotheses can be posed. 1. Underground societies prioritized needs differently, valuing air and light above food, since starvation takes days but suffocation or darkness can end life in hours. Another, they ritualized needs into strict hierarchies, sanctifying the act of tending fire or conserving water, elevating necessity into sacred duty. In both, need becomes culture. Detection signals might include waste systems carefully organized, hearths built in patterns suggesting controlled use, or communal storage pits indicating collective management. Such traces, if uncovered, would reveal not only survival but deliberate organization around need. Confounders complicate interpretation. Natural cave debris can mimic storage. Sediment layers can conceal or scatter human order. What looks like deliberate balance may be accident. Yet patterns, repeated chambers reused across centuries, speak to continuity beyond chance. The Red Team critique is pragmatic. The underground magnifies fragility. A surface village can grow fields, hunt widely, trade openly. Underground groups risk collapse from scarcity. Could such fragile arrangements truly be called civilizations? The counterpoint is quiet. Civilization is not measured by size, but by continuity. Even small groups, if they developed systems of balance, ritual, and memory, qualify. The scale is different, the essence the same. The analogy drifts. The needs of a people underground are like threads in a loom. Each one fragile, each one necessary, woven together into fabric strong enough to hold community. Remove one, and the fabric tears. An implication follows. A civilization underground would likely have been more aware of its dependencies than we are today. Every breath, every sip, every spark would carry weight. Such awareness could have shaped culture into one of reverence, treating necessity itself as sacred, embedding survival within myth. Time stretches the view. On the human scale, a single mistake, too much smoke, too little water, could end lives swiftly. On the cultural scale, the lessons of such mistakes may have been codified into law and ritual, carried across generations. On the geological scale, almost all traces would vanish, leaving us to guess at systems once finely tuned to fragile equilibrium. The section rests here. The needs of a people are universal, yet underground they become sharper, closer to the bone, impossible to ignore. Civilization in stone would not have been built on expansion or luxury, but on care, meeting each need deliberately, reverently, weaving survival into the very core of culture. If one distills survival to its most immediate essentials, 3 stand out: breath, water, fire. Underground, these elements would have been not just resources but lifelines, each precarious, each bound to the others. Air sustains life, but is consumed by flame. Fire illuminates and warms, but pollutes the breath. Water nourishes, but also drowns if it floods chambers. A civilization beneath stone would have needed to orchestrate these 3 with exquisite care, turning necessity into daily practice. A baseline fact. Archaeological evidence shows that humans controlled fire hundreds of thousands of years ago, long before agriculture. Caves contain soot layers, torch fragments, blackened ceilings. Fire was not accessory but anchor of human presence underground. Without it, darkness overwhelms. With it, life continues. Yet, underground, fire's gift comes with cost: oxygen depletion, carbon dioxide accumulation, smoke clinging to ceilings. 2 hypotheses extend. 1. Communities relied on natural drafts, choosing caves where air circulated, placing fires near, vents to sustain both light and breath. Another, they used minimal flame, supplementing with dim alternatives, glowing fungi, firefly jars, or simple patience in darkness to conserve air. Both approaches suggest an awareness of fragility, an ethic of balance. Detection signals include soot patterns at cave ceilings far from entrances, implying deliberate fire use in deep chambers. Hearths layered in sequence show repeated occupation. Scorch marks near vents may indicate intentional positioning of flame to draw circulation. These traces reveal attempts at balance between breath and fire. Confounders persist. Natural fires sometimes burn in caves struck by lightning or ignited by methane seeps. Smoke stains alone do not prove continuous human presence, yet hearths with tools, food remains, and repeated layers argue strongly for intentional use. The Red Team Critique notes, underground life multiplies risk. Smoke kills silently. Water floods unpredictably. Air stagnates. Would fragile groups really gamble their existence on such unstable conditions? Perhaps not willingly. Yet necessity often leaves no choice. Where storms, predators, or ice ruled, the surface, stone chambers may have seemed the safer wager. The analogy drifts softly. Breath, water, fire are like three strings of an instrument. Alone, they hum faintly. Together, they make harmony. But if one is pulled too tight, the sound breaks. Underground civilization would have lived as musicians, tuning survival daily. An implication follows. Such daily negotiation might have shaped culture profoundly. Fire tenders could hold sacred roles, keepers of balance between air and flame. Water sources might be revered as portals, guarded with ritual. Breath itself, unseen yet vital, could have been honored as spirit, the measure of life in stone. Time widens the lens. Breath lasts minutes, water days. Fire can persist generations if tended. The immediacy of these scales would have governed underground rhythm, vigilance for breath, care for water, continuity for flame. Civilization here would be marked not by abundance, but by awareness, living always in tune with these essentials. The section rests with a quiet image, a chamber dimly lit, fire smoldering low, water dripping steadily, air moving gently through, unseen cracks. People sit together, knowing that their world depends on these three threads woven carefully each day. Civilization in shadow may have begun not with conquest or monument, but with the fragile harmony of breath, water, fire. When survival depends on fragile balances, the act of keeping balance itself becomes sacred. Underground, where air, water, and flame could fail at any moment, every gesture that preserved them may have carried ritual weight. Civilization in stone would not only have lived by necessity, it would have sacralized necessity, weaving daily acts of maintenance into patterns of meaning. Continuity would have been ritual, and ritual continuity. A baseline fact: anthropology shows that ritual often arises around essential but precarious resources. Societies with uncertain rains invent ceremonies for water. Peoples near volatile. Volcanoes build myths around fire. When survival is fragile, culture steps in to stabilize it, embedding practical care within symbolic frameworks. Underground, this tendency would have magnified. Two hypotheses unfold. 1. Underground communities developed rituals directly tied to survival. Chants performed before opening vents, offerings placed at water sources, taboos regulating fire use. Another, rituals extended metaphorically, embedding survival acts into wider cosmologies. Breath as spirit, flame as ancestor, water as womb of life. In both cases, necessity became continuity through story. Detection signals might include repeated deposits of offerings at springs or hearths, carvings near vents, or consistent placement of symbolic objects in living chambers. Such evidence would show not only habitation, but reverence, the transformation of resources into sacred centers. Confounders complicate matters. Offerings may be misinterpreted, practical tools mistaken for ritual. Ash layers may represent mere cooking, not ceremony. Distinguishing survival from symbolism is always delicate. Yet repetition, deliberate placement, and persistence across generations strengthen the case for ritual. The red team critique offers caution. Ritual may be projection, from our own imagination imposed upon what were simply practical routines. The counterpoint replies, humans rarely separate practice from meaning. Even today, we imbue meals with ceremony, fire with festival, water with blessing. Underground, where fragility sharpened awareness, ritualization would have been almost inevitable. The analogy drifts gently. Rituals of continuity are like knots tied in rope, ensuring that when the line frays, it still holds. Each knot is small, each gesture simple, but together they weave endurance. An implication emerges. A civilization underground would have been sustained not only by resources but by memory. Rituals passed down, reminding each generation how to survive. Forgetting a taboo, breaking a ritual, might not only offend spirits but imperil lives. Culture here was survival itself. Time reframes the idea. On the human scale, rituals repeated daily bind communities, reinforcing identity. On the generational scale, they preserve knowledge long after practical reasons fade. On the geological scale, artifacts of ritual, carved marks, buried offerings, outlast the people themselves, whispering continuity through stone. The section quiets with this thought. Rituals underground would not have been spectacle but necessity wrapped in meaning. A song to honor water, a chant to tend fire, a silence before opening vents, small acts repeated endlessly, shaping civilization not as conquest but as continuity. In the dark, survival became sacred, and sacredness ensured survival. Civilization is often defined by its tools. On the surface, we speak of plows, pottery, and metallurgy as markers of cultural advance. Underground, the technologies would have been different, less visible, perhaps less durable, but no less vital. A society in stone would have developed skills to manage air, water, fire, and light, techniques adapted to fragility rather than abundance. These hidden technologies may have left faint or no trace, yet they were the scaffolding of survival. A baseline fact: many technologies leave little behind. Wood rots, fibers dissolve, resins vanish. Even on the surface, entire traditions of craft disappear into time, remembered only in indirect traces. Underground, dampness and collapse erase even more. The absence of evidence does not prove the absence of invention. Two hypotheses arise. 1. Underground communities developed subtle tools: hollow reeds to direct air, clay lamps with carefully balanced wicks, woven carriers for fungi gardens, stone channels to guide dripping water. Another, their technologies were embodied in practice rather than objects: precise knowledge of airflow, timing of fire use, cycles of rotation between chambers. In the first case, tools perish. In the second, they were never physical to begin with. Detection signals might include wear patterns on stone where conduits once lay, soot marks indicating lamp placement, or small carvings aligned with airflow. Such traces are faint, often indistinguishable, from natural marks, but they suggest design woven into stone itself. Confounders abound. Erosion carves grooves that mimic channels. Mineral stains resemble soot. Archaeologists must tread carefully not to overinterpret. Yet coherence, aligned marks, repeated across sites, suggests intention. The Red Team critique warns: true technologies, pottery, metallurgy, agriculture, transform societies. Without durable tools, can we speak of civilization? The counterpoint replies: technology is not always monumental. Knowledge itself is a tool to regulate breath, to conserve flame, to cultivate fungi. These may have been technologies as decisive as plows or kilns, even if they vanish without record. The analogy settles softly. Hidden technologies are like threads in fabric woven of air. They cannot be seen, yet they hold the weave together. Civilization underground may have been clothed in such invisible skill, garments that time has unraveled. An implication follows. Our surface bias may blind us. We expect to find pottery shards, walls, bronze, and iron. If the first civilization was subterranean, its technologies may have been subtler, less durable, encoded in ritual rather than artifact. We may be overlooking civilizations not because they never existed, but because we seek the wrong signals. Time widens the lens. Technologies vanish quickly, yet their absence does not erase their impact. Fire, once learned, transformed humanity, even though its first sparks left no artifact. Underground, hidden technologies may have carried people for generations, their memory lingering in story, their traces sealed in collapsed chambers. The section rests here. Civilization beneath stone may never show us plows or pottery, but its technologies may have been no less profound. Knowledge of balance, tools of fragility, inventions designed not for monument but for survival. Hidden technologies, unseen yet essential, may have been the quiet heart of humanity's first world below. Wherever people gather, waste accumulates. Ash, bones, broken tools, excrement, all byproducts of survival. On the surface, winds scatter, rivers carry away, soil absorbs. Underground, nothing disperses easily. Every chamber becomes a closed loop. Waste lingers, air fouls, disease threatens. For a civilization below, this problem would have been constant. To endure, they would have needed strategies not just for gathering food and water, but for dispersing what remained after. A baseline fact: archaeology often identifies settlements by their waste. Middens, heaps of discarded shells, bones, and pottery mark villages more clearly than houses. Trash endures longer than walls. In caves, waste layers likewise accumulate, revealing occupation through soot, charcoal, and detritus. But a true, underground society would have faced more than archaeology's traces. They would have faced the problem of disposal as daily survival. Two hypotheses emerge. 1. Underground people carried waste outward, back to entrances, depositing it beyond. Living zones, perhaps creating refuse mounds that archaeologists might one day find. Another, they devised internal systems, dedicating side chambers for storage, using ash to cover excrement, perhaps even cultivating fungi or insects that thrive on decay. Both approaches turn waste from hazard into managed cycle. Detection signals might include chambers filled disproportionately with bones or ash, spatial separation of habitation and disposal, or unusual concentrations of nutrient-rich sediment suggesting decomposition. Such patterns, if distinct from animal dens, could indicate deliberate management of waste. Confounders are numerous. Floods wash debris into caves, predators drag carcasses, natural fires leave ash. To distinguish human waste systems from natural, accumulation requires repeated patterned evidence. Layers that speak of continuity, not accident. The red team critique is blunt. Without effective waste management, disease would ravage underground groups. Perhaps this explains why civilizations rose on the surface instead, where dispersal is easier. The counterpoint is cautious. Small groups may have solved the problem with discipline, limiting numbers, enforcing strict hygiene rituals. Scale may have been smaller, but civilization does not demand size. It demands structure. The analogy drifts gently. Waste underground is like shadow upon shadow, the residue of life pressing close. To survive, people must turn shadow into cycle, transforming danger into balance. An implication follows. If waste was managed, it may have been ritualized. Disposal could carry sacred meaning, taboos ensuring health cloaked as reverence. What modernity calls sanitation may once have been myth, protecting life by making waste dangerous in story as much as in fact. Time reframes the idea. On short scales, waste poisons. On longer ones, it fertilizes. Ash enriches soil, refuse attracts decomposers. Underground societies may have learned to see waste not as end, but as resource, recycling within stone what surface peoples entrusted, to rivers and winds. The section rests here, with the image of a side chamber filled not with ceremony or tools, but with the quiet burden of survival's residue. Civilization underground, if it endured because it faced this problem daily, turning fragility into continuity. Waste, often overlooked, may have been one of its central challenges, and perhaps one of its central achievements. If civilizations once lived beneath the earth, why is their memory so faint? The question circles like an echo, for surely a people would leave traces, tools, carvings, bones. Yet perhaps the most telling evidence of an underground society is not presence, but absence. Geology swallows, water erases, stone collapses. What survives on the surface as ruin or shard may vanish entirely in the underworld, leaving us with only hints, patterns, voids. The marks of absence may themselves be testimony. A baseline fact: preservation bias governs archaeology. Dry deserts conserve textiles for thousands of years. Peat bogs preserve bodies whole. Volcanic ash seals a city. But caves and underground systems, damp and shifting, dissolve organic matter quickly. Wood, fiber, flesh, all rot. Even stone tools may wash away in floods, settle deep in inaccessible cracks, or be buried under collapses. The underground resists memory. 2 hypotheses. Extend. 1. Evidence of subterranean life is simply erased. Its remains lost in waterlogged chambers or compressed under falling rock. Another, the evidence survives, but in forms we do not recognize. Subtle patterns of soot, faint channels, isotopic anomalies that archaeologists overlook because they do not fit the template of surface civilizations. Absence, in this sense, is not emptiness but blindness. Detection signals of such absences might include abrupt gaps in the archaeological record where populations seem to vanish, unexplained soot layers deep underground, or unexplored networks sealed by collapse. These absences may hint at lives lived below, hidden from the record above. Confounders are difficult. Geological processes create absences naturally: collapses, floods, erosion. To read every gap as cultural is error. Yet when gaps align with human patterns, migration pauses, ritual myths of descent, the possibility sharpens. The red team critique is sharp. Archaeology depends on material. Without objects, we have only speculation. To build theories on absence is to risk illusion. The counterpoint replies, absence itself can be a clue. The silence of evidence may tell us not that nothing existed, but that what existed has been buried beyond reach. The analogy floats softly. Marks of absence are like missing notes in a melody. They are silent, yet they shape the tune. Civilization underground may be known not by its ruins but by its gaps. An implication follows. Perhaps we should look not only for presence but for disruption. Moments when surface populations vanish. Inexplicably, when myths of hidden realms rise suddenly. When archaeology shows voids instead of villages. These may be fingerprints of societies below, recorded not in artifact but in absence. Time deepens the thought. On human scales, absence is loss. On geological scales, it is inevitable. Stone crushes memory, water dissolves it, time scatters it. If an underground civilization once lived, perhaps its greatest legacy is invisibility, a life so thoroughly swallowed by earth that only silence remains. The section rests here. Marks of absence do not prove, but they invite. They remind us that archaeology is always incomplete. That silence is part of history's record. Civilization underground may never reveal itself directly. It may persist only as an echo in gaps, a shadow in absence, a possibility we sense precisely because the stone is so quiet. Time is not kind to memory. On the surface, winds strip walls, rains wear inscriptions, roots crumble foundations. Underground, the processes differ, but the outcome is the same: slow erasure. Moisture seeps, minerals creep, stone collapses inward. Whatever people once built beneath the earth, if they built at all, would not stand against such relentless patience. Memory, preserved in stone, may dissolve as surely as pigment fades in light. A baseline fact: speleothems, stalactites, stalagmites, flowstones grow continuously, dripping mineral by mineral, sealing surfaces beneath calcite. Within decades, soot layers vanish under gloss. Within centuries, carvings blur. Within millennia, whole walls are encased, as if geology itself were rewriting human traces into its own language. The cave that once held fire and song becomes indistinguishable from untouched chambers. Two hypotheses arise. 1. Most evidence of subterranean life has been buried under mineral skins, invisible unless carefully sliced open. Another, collapses have sealed chambers entirely, preserving them like tombs but hiding them from discovery. In both cases, memory exists, but hidden, inaccessible, without chance or technology. Detection signals may include anomalies in mineral layers, soot sealed beneath calcite, abrupt isotopic shifts from fire, or subtle outlines of carvings fossilized into flowstone. Such signals show how human presence is not gone, but overwritten, like ink beneath new paint. Confounders complicate. Fires can start naturally. Mineral stains mimic human soot. Collapses occur without habitation. Distinguishing genuine human memory from geological chance requires careful stratigraphy, but the possibility remains. What we call absence may be presence disguised. The Red Team critique presses, if all evidence is erased, then claims of underground civilizations are unfalsifiable, immune to proof or disproof. This makes them speculation, not science. The counterpoint responds gently. The same was once said of microbes before microscopes or exoplanets before telescopes. Erasure challenges discovery, but does not erase reality itself. The analogy drifts softly. Memory underground is like ink on parchment submerged in water. It does not vanish immediately, but it blurs, fades, disperses until only faint stains remain. To read them requires imagination as much as method. An implication follows. Civilizations may pass not only into myth, but into stone, absorbed so thoroughly that discovery is nearly impossible. What remains, then, are echoes. In myths of descent, in unexplained soot layers, in gaps of record. The erosion of memory does not prove non-existence. It only proves time's mastery. Time itself becomes the lesson. For stone, 1,000 years is a blink. For culture, it is eternity. If underground civilizations existed tens of thousands of years ago, their memory may have dissolved long before the first surface cities rose. The silence we hear today may be not denial, but aftermath. The section settles here. Memory is fragile, even in light. In shadow, it erodes more quietly still. Civilization beneath the earth may never yield monuments or artifacts grand enough to persuade. Its legacy, if real, may be only erosion, soft hints, sealed traces, myths that endure while matter dissolves. Memory fades, but the question remains. Archaeology is shaped as much by what survives as by what is lost. We know more of stone temples than wooden houses, more of bronze weapons than woven baskets. What we call history is already filtered, bent by preservation bias. If the first civilization lived underground, the bias deepens. Caves erase soft matter, floods scatter deposits, collapses seal chambers. What remains visible to us is only a fraction, perhaps the least representative part. A baseline fact. Organic materials, cloth, leather, wood, decay rapidly in damp conditions. Even bone dissolves over millennia in acidic environments. Only stone tools, pigments bound to walls, and rare mineralized remains endure. Surface societies leave more visible traces because their structures sprawl and weather differently. Underground societies may vanish almost entirely. Two hypotheses follow. 1. The faint traces we have, soot on ceilings, pigments on walls, are the last survivors of a richer material culture stripped bare by time. Another, much still lies hidden, preserved in sealed chambers yet undiscovered, awaiting chance. Openings like Mobile Cave. Both imply that what we know now is fragment, not whole. Detection signals of preservation bias are themselves absences. We find scattered tools but no structures, suggesting wood or fiber once present. We see soot but no lamps, pigments but no brushes. Each absence hints at perished complements, unseen but once essential. Confounders complicate the picture. Some gaps reflect reality. Perhaps early societies did not develop certain tools rather than their traces being lost. Archaeologists must tread carefully between absence as erasure and absence as truth. The Red Team critique emphasizes, invoking preservation bias risks unfalsifiability. If all missing evidence is blamed on decay, then any claim can be shielded from disproof. The counterpoint insists, preservation bias is measurable. We can estimate decay rates, analyze contexts, and recognize patterns where certain materials almost never survive. This is not excuse, but condition. The analogy drifts softly. History is like a mosaic seen through cracks in plaster. Some tiles shine through, others are buried. We reconstruct the image from fragments, always aware it is incomplete. An implication follows. If underground civilizations existed, their erasure is not surprising. We should not expect monuments but fragments, odd residues, anomalies, myths. Absence is not evidence of absence, but reminder of the fragility of traces. Time sharpens the lesson. A few centuries erase wood. A few millennia erase bone. 10,000 years can reduce civilizations to hints. 100,000 can scatter them beyond recognition. The scales of erosion and decay far exceed the span of a culture. The section rests gently. Preservation bias humbles us. What we hold as the record of humanity is already partial, skewed toward the durable. If a first civilization lived beneath stone, its memory may be thinned to almost nothing, not by conspiracy or concealment, but by the quiet work of time. What remains is not proof or disproof, but possibility, carried in fragments too faint to be final. Though much is erased, some signals resist time. Pigments pressed into mineral walls, soot sealed beneath calcite, carvings etched deep into limestone. These endure like faint voices waiting to be read. If civilization once lived underground, its testimony would not be monuments of brick or bronze, but whispers in stone, subtle signals that survive the erosion of softer traces. A baseline fact. Caves around the world preserve art tens of thousands of years old. Lascaux, Altamira, Chauvet. Their walls still hold images of bison, horses, lions, painted in ochre and charcoal. These pigments survived precisely because they were placed underground, shielded from rain, wind, and sun. The underground erases much, but it also preserves uniquely. Two hypotheses extend. 1. The signals we see are fragments of ritual, isolated acts of art rather than evidence of full societies. Another, they are the visible edge of deeper practices, once accompanied by structures, tools, and rituals now lost. In the first, cave, art is peripheral. In the second, it is central, the only surviving clue of a hidden world. Detection signals include not only paintings but microtraces, charcoal dust embedded in sediments, torch fragments preserved in damp soil, isotopic anomalies. in mineral layers. Archaeologists now use techniques like uranium series dating on calcite over art, revealing that these signals can survive tens of millennia, embedded in stone's own growth. Confounders are real. Natural mineral stains can resemble pigments. Soot can come from wildfires. Cracks can mimic carvings. Distinguishing intention from accident requires context, pattern, and repetition. Yet, when horses run across walls in coherent sequence or handprints appear side by side, human presence is undeniable. The Red Team critique reminds, art alone is not civilization. Symbolic acts prove imagination, not complex society. The counterpoint is quiet. Imagination is seed. A people who gather to create symbols, who light torches in darkness to paint their world, are already practicing the shared meaning that forms the core of civilization. The analogy drifts gently. Signals in stone are like constellations seen through clouds. Only fragments are visible, yet they invite connection, hinting at larger patterns hidden from view. An implication follows. If we wish to search for underground civilizations, we must learn to read subtlety. Microscopic soot layers, mineral, shifts, pigments sealed beneath stone. Grand ruins may never appear. Only small, persistent signals will whisper the story. Time deepens perspective. A carving may outlast wood and cloth, but even it blurs as stone grows. What we see are partial records, like voices carried faintly through long corridors. Yet, faint is not silent. Even now, handprints from 40,000 years ago press against us, reminders that someone was here, underground, shaping stone with intention. The section rests here. Signals in stone are the closest we may come to hearing the underground speak. They are whispers, not declarations, but they endure. Civilization underground, if it lived, may be gone, but its signals may still be waiting, quiet within stone, asking us to listen more carefully. Every search for hidden civilizations risks mistaking nature for culture. Underground, this danger multiplies. Water carves chambers resembling halls, collapses shape alcoves that look like benches, mineral stains mimic handprints, and soot from natural fires coats ceilings like torches once might have. The underground is full of illusions, confounders and shadow. To ask whether civilization lived there requires not only imagination, but discipline, the ability to separate accident from intention. A baseline fact, speleogenesis, the natural formation of caves, produces remarkable architecture. Flowing water cuts smooth passages, erosion sculpts columns and domes. Mineral deposits form draperies and curtains that resemble crafted ornament. These structures can easily be mistaken for human work. Archaeologists must parse carefully. Is a chamber widened by hand or by centuries of drip and flood? Two hypotheses arise. 1. Many features attributed to early humans may in fact be natural, coincidences mistaken for craft. Another, much genuine human work has been dismissed as natural, overlooked because it blends so seamlessly with geology. In both directions, error lurks, confounding interpretation. Detection signals that distinguish human from natural include tool marks, symmetry, and repeated pattern. A single groove may be accident. Multiple aligned grooves suggest intention. Random soot layers may come from wildfire. Soot concentrated in hearth-like circles suggests people. Archaeology underground often depends on such distinctions, fragile and debated. Confounders, however, remain stubborn. Animals drag bones into caves, floods scatter remains, minerals encrust artifacts until they resemble stone. Even absence can deceive, leading us to think nothing was there when it has only been concealed. The Red Team critique warns, the underground's deceptive nature makes claims of civilization almost impossible to verify. The counterpoint replies, difficulty does not erase possibility. It only requires rigor, humility, and patience. Science advances by acknowledging confounders, not by denying inquiry. The analogy drifts softly. Confounders are like echoes in darkness, shapes that sound like voices but are only stone replying. To hear the true voice requires listening through echoes, discerning pattern from noise. An implication follows. The underground may never yield certainty. At best, it may offer converging signals, multiple weak traces aligning into stronger probability. Civilization in shadow, if it existed, would remain elusive, glimpsed only through layers of ambiguity. Perhaps that elusiveness is fitting, a mirror of the environment itself, uncertain, veiled, half-lit. Time reframes the challenge. Geological processes that create confounders work slowly but inexorably, blending human traces into natural forms. Over millennia, the distinction fades until even experts disagree. Civilization beneath may persist only as possibility, forever, entangled with confounders in stone. The section rests gently. To seek civilization underground is to accept confusion, to work among shadows where nature and culture blur. Certainty may never come. What remains is careful listening, humility. Before stone, patience with ambiguity. In shadow, confounders are inevitable, but so too is the quiet persistence of the question. Every hypothesis deserves its sternest critic, and the idea of an underground civilization is no exception. To red team this vision is to assemble the strongest arguments against it, not to dismiss but to test, to temper imagination with rigor. If the hypothesis cannot endure these critiques, it falters. If it survives, it becomes sharper, humbler, more plausible. A baseline fact: human civilizations as we know them depend on surplus, agriculture, trade, and scale. None of these are easily possible underground. Fields require sun, trade requires mobility, and scale requires abundance. By this measure, a true subterranean civilization seems implausible. At best, small groups could persist, but not complex societies with architecture, hierarchy, and continuity. The first critique: resources underground are too limited. Food webs are sparse, energy scarce, ecosystems fragile. Humans require thousands of calories per person per day. Underground supply cannot scale. This argues for impossibility. The second critique: air is finite. Fires deplete oxygen, carbon dioxide accumulates. Without advanced ventilation systems, large populations underground would suffocate. Survival may last weeks or months, but not generations. The third critique: psychology resists. Extended darkness disrupts circadian rhythms, induces depression, and blurs perception. Small experiments show strain even within weeks. A people choosing permanent life underground may collapse under its weight. Detection signals, too, argue against. Archaeology has found cave art, burials, temporary shelters, but no evidence of large-scale underground habitation. If such civilizations existed, why are there no clear ruins? Confounders sharpen the critique. Soot may be natural, alcoves geological, bones dragged by animals. What is interpreted as culture may dissolve under scrutiny into accident. The red team. Voice concludes, at best, caves were refugees, sanctuaries, ritual sites, not true cradles of civilization. The surface, with its light and soil, remains the only plausible birthplace. And yet, even within critique, questions linger. If food, air, and psychology constrain, why do examples like Cappadocia exist? Why do myths of descent recur globally? Why do sealed ecosystems like Movile thrive in darkness for millions of years? Counter-arguments do not erase possibility. They refine it, forcing imagination to become disciplined. The analogy rests softly. Critique is like fire tempered in water. It does not destroy the blade, but sharpens it. The red team of stone reminds us that speculation must be tested against reality, that only what survives resistance deserves to endure. An implication follows. If an underground civilization did exist, it must have been smaller, humbler, more fragile than grand myths suggest. Not sprawling kingdoms, but disciplined enclaves. Not empires, but continuities. Critique pares away extravagance, leaving possibility modest but resilient. Time reframes the test. On the scale of centuries, survival underground may falter. On the scale of decades, perhaps, it thrived. On the scale of memory, even brief endurance could seed myths that persist for millennia. The section settles here. The red team of stone does not dismiss the question. It refines it. Civilization underground may not have been vast, but it could have been real. To endure critique is to grow sharper. To survive doubt is to earn possibility. When the question cannot be resolved with certainty, imagination divides into branches. Each path unfolds a different world, grounded in what is known yet open to what might have been. To ask whether the first civilization lived underground is to consider these branches, not as proof, but as possibility maps, each sketching a way the story could have unfolded. A baseline fact. Scenario building is a tool of science as well as speculation. Climate models branch into futures, evolutionary. Trees branch into histories. In each case, we do not claim certainty, but outline what follows if assumptions hold. The underground hypothesis deserves the same treatment. Multiple possible worlds traced carefully. Branch 1. The Refuge Hypothesis. Here, caves are temporary sanctuaries. People flee storms, predators, or conflict, living below for weeks or months, perhaps ritualizing the act but always returning above. Civilization, in this path, still rises in the open, but shaped subtly by memories of refuge. Myths of descent, rituals of darkness, echo this stage. Branch 2. The Hidden Hearth Hypothesis. Here, small groups settle permanently in caves, carving, modest chambers, cultivating fungi, fishing blind rivers, rationing air and flame. They endure for generations, fragile but continuous, forming the first experiments in social structure. Civilization begins not with surplus but with balance, not with monument but with restraint. Branch 3. The Echo Hypothesis. Here, underground societies existed briefly, then vanished, erased by geology. What remains are only fragments, soot sealed under calcite, myths of underworlds, absences in archaeological record. Civilization as we know it still rises on the surface, but its first spark was subterranean, forgotten by time. Branch 4. The Allegory Hypothesis. Here, no permanent underground societies ever existed. Caves were ritual sites, thresholds into myth. Myths of descent and hidden realms arise not from memory but from imagination, symbolic rather than historical. Civilization is surface-born, and the underground is only mirror of mortality. Detection signals differ in each branch. Hearths and tools for refuge, storage pits and waste chambers for hidden hearths, faint anomalies and absence for echoes, offerings and art for allegory. Each scenario leaves a different trace, faint but testable. The red team voice reminds, only the allegory branch is strongly evidenced. The others remain speculative. Yet the counterpoint whispers, absence of proof is not proof of absence. Each branch remains open, waiting for discovery or closure. The analogy drifts gently. Scenario branches are like roots of a tree spreading in soil. Some reach water, some end in stone. All belong to the same trunk of possibility, diverging yet connected. An implication follows. The truth may be plural. Perhaps different groups chose differently, some refuges, some hearths, some rituals. Civilization may have braided these paths together, surface and underground interwoven into one lineage. Time stretches perspective. Branches may close with evidence or remain open for centuries. What matters is not certainty, but clarity. To see the range of possibility, to understand what each path would mean. The section rests here. Scenario branches do not answer the question, but they map its terrain. The underground remains possible, in several ways: refuge, hearth, echo, allegory. Civilization's origin may not be one story, but a branching of many. At the end, the question divides in its simplest form. What if the first civilization did live underground, and what if it did not? The implications of both possibilities reach beyond archaeology, touching how we imagine ourselves, how we situate humanity within time and stone. A baseline fact. Humanity's deep past is fragmentary. We know that anatomically modern humans appeared hundreds of thousands of years ago, but organized societies appear in the record only much later, on the surface. The gap between body and city leaves wide room for speculation. Into that gap, the underground hypothesis enters, offering an alternative cradle. If true, civilization began not in sunlit fields, but in darkness. Humanity's first great experiment in continuity was born in chambers of stone, sustained by fungi, fish, and fragile air. This would mean our cultural roots are older and stranger than assumed, shaped by patience, balance, and restraint rather than conquest and surplus. Myths of descent, rituals of darkness, and fascination with hidden realms would be echoes of real origins, distorted but enduring. If false, the underground is only memory of refuge and metaphor, never foundation. Civilization rose on the surface, dependent on agriculture, sunlight, and open horizons. Caves were shelters, sanctuaries, ritual sites, but not homes of continuity. Myths of underworlds reflect psychology, not history. In this case, the underground remains important, but symbolic rather than literal in humanity's story. Detection. Signals continue to divide the two. If hearths, waste systems, or sustained modification of caves were ever found, the balance would tip toward truth. If evidence remains always fragmentary, ambiguous, or absent, the weight rests with falsity. For now, the underground is suspended between them, neither confirmed nor dismissed. The red team note presses. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. Without clear traces, the hypothesis cannot be accepted. The counterpoint replies, softly, absence of evidence is natural in caves where geology erases more than it preserves. Certainty may remain beyond reach. The analogy lingers. The question itself is like a cave mouth at dusk. Darkness within, light outside, both possible paths. We stand at the threshold, uncertain which is origin, which is echo. An implication follows. Whether true or false, the underground shapes us. If true, it is our hidden beginning. If false, it is our enduring metaphor, the place where we project fears and hopes. In either case, caves belong to our story. Time reframes the thought. Geological time swallows certainty. Human time seeks meaning. The underground hypothesis may never be resolved with finality, yet it enriches how we think of civilization, expanding its possible origins, deepening its mystery. The section rests here. If true, civilization underground humbles us, reminding that humanity once thrived in silence and shadow. If false, it still reveals how deeply we dream of hidden worlds. Either way, the question endures, carved like echo into stone. The question now lingers, no longer pressed forward, only allowed to rest. If the first civilization lived underground, its traces are faint, its signals blurred, its memory eroded by stone. If it did not, the underground still carries our oldest dreams, shaping myths, rituals, and symbols that endure across cultures. In either case, the caves remain, chambers of silence, passages of shadow, stone that both conceals and preserves. Beneath the surface, time flows differently. The air is still, the walls glisten with slow drips, and the dark folds everything into itself. To imagine people there is to imagine patience, balance, continuity without horizon. Civilization in such a place would not rush or expand, but endure gently, in rhythm with stone and water. The underground offers not answers, but atmosphere. It teaches that life can persist without sun, that memory can dissolve without notice, that meaning can be woven from necessity. Whether or not it once held the first civilization, it still whispers lessons, restraint, reverence, endurance. Now the rhythm slows. No more hypotheses, no more branches, no need for verdict. Only the image of a chamber, deep within the earth, where a faint flame glows, where echoes soften into silence, where people once may have gathered or may never have. The question remains open, suspended like a drop of water trembling on stone, unresolved yet complete in its uncertainty. Here the words stop moving forward. They rest, like breath held in still air, like fire burning low, like water pooling, quietly in shadow. Civilization may or may not have begun underground, but the possibility itself is enough. It invites us into patience, into humility, into wonder at the quiet beneath.